Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Kenton, Hornbeck, co-host of the BeckDeck podcast here on YouTube. I'm joined alongside my co-host, Logan Decker. Logan, how are we doing this week, man?
Doing great, man. It's been a wonderful week for a lot of sports news, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the segment. But the Heisman, we're a week away from the college football playoff. We got a lot of change in the head coaching sphere in college football, and then of course NFL is getting closer and closer to playoffs. And I guess personally, me and my wife Kaylee have been revisiting some Sunny in Philadelphia. And the one episode that's been sticking out for me most recently is the mob boss episode, where the gang is trying to join the mob. And the reason why that sticks out is one of the songs that comes on my work is Two of Hearts. And if you've watched that episode, that is the song that Dennis plays or is forced to play when he is a male escort for the mob boss's wife. It's a great scene, um, just because of how Dennis's character is and his interaction in that scenario. How have you been, man?
I've been pretty good, work, typical, but speaking of mob bosses, I've actually been watching The Sopranos. So I just started that show around a week ago on Monday, I would say. I'm about 7 episodes in. I love it. I love mob stuff. Tony is a G. Shout out Paulie Walnuts. Both of those guys rock. And I always knew I would like the show, but I never thought I had enough time to really sit down and pay attention to it. But recently I'm like, why not? Like, let's just do it. So I've really enjoyed watching The Sopranos. That's been great. And by the way, It's Always Sunny, probably my favorite comedy of all time. I would say Succession or Breaking Bad are up there for my favorite shows of all time. But I've been watching It's Always Sunny for years and years and years. That was my like routine. I would come home from school when I was in middle school and high school, grab a box of Cheez-Its, flip on It's Always Sunny, and sit there and watch it on Comedy Central or FX. I can't remember what channel, but I love that show.
Yeah, it's Sopranos, man. It's a cult classic, and I'll have to admit, I've only seen snippets. I haven't sat down and watched it. I absolutely need to watch it for how much of a cultural icon that show is, and Tony Soprano is.
But yeah,
Um,
Tony's a meme now too. I saw the memes. I'm like, I have to see this now.
yeah, it's pushing me. I need to go. I need to actually set some time up and watch it. But nobody came here to talk about The Sopranos. Maybe a different episode once we both actually pick it up. But today, our topic, which was Kenton's idea, it's a fantastic idea, is we are talking about the worst American Big Four sports franchises, and we each nominated two. The reason why we picked two is we did not realize, or at least I did not realize, how much detail is in these topics when you're looking into a history of some of these teams, whether they're expansion teams or long, first established teams within a league. It's a lot of information, and you had to cipher through a lot of it, and we don't want to oversaturate the topic. With that being said, I'm going to let the man who had the idea take it off with his first nomination.
And really quick, everyone, before I say my first pick, I want to preface that there are a plethora of teams across American sports that could qualify for this dishonor. We could have talked about the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously, they're not going to be on this list, but that was a team that could easily qualify. They've been in the news a lot recently. I don't know. For me, and probably for Logan also, we wanted to pick teams that we personally wanted to talk about and share that with you all. So with that being said, my first franchise is a baseball team. It is the only baseball franchise on this list today. And I thought it was appropriate because they were top of mind for me when I was at work the other day looking through payrolls, as one does for sports teams. That is the Miami Marlins, the formerly known Florida Marlins, are one of the worst franchises in Major League Baseball history. And if I'm not mistaken, because I'm trying to think of your list, they are the only team on this list with not one, but two championships. Now, if you're in the audience, you might think, Well, Kenton, how does a team with multiple championships even qualify for a list as the worst sports franchises of all time? All time. And that's a great question because, conventional thinking would lead you there. However, the Marlins are absolutely one of the worst baseball teams in history, and they've really only had two good seasons. They happened to win the World Series both of those years, 1997 and 2003. So I'm going to spin some yarn here about the tale of the Florida/Miami Marlins. Hopefully, I'm able to take you all behind the scenes a little bit about why that franchise is so poorly run. So Miami Marlins, or the Florida Marlins, started back in the early 90s. 1993 was their first season. They were an expansion team along with I believe, Colorado Rockies or Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays might have came in 96. Regardless, they were an expansion team. Started off 64 wins, followed that up in a strike-shortened season with 51 wins. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the win counts, but just know they were an expansion team at this time. They were struggling. 67 wins in 95, 80 wins in 96. So starting to improve a little bit. And then in 1997, their fifth year in Major League Baseball, they have 92 wins and win the World Series. They finished second in their division, which is a little note that is important to know going forward. So they beat the Cleveland Indians in a 4-3 7-game series, legendary series. And then they fire-sold their entire team and won 54 games the following season. They won 92 games, sold everybody, 54 games. So this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the history of the Florida/Miami Marlins. When they end up winning, the owner chooses to sell high, get rid of all the players, cost cut, and, send the franchise into maybe not essentially disarray. So that's kind of the overview of the Marlins in the 90s. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and take a macro look at the Marlins here. This is all time. The Miami Marlins have a .460 all-time winning percentage in Major League Baseball, one of the worst in the history of the sport. They have made the playoffs four times in their franchise's history. One of those times was in a COVID-shortened season. And then two of those times, they won the World Series. So two championships, one Mickey Mouse-like COVID playoff appearance, comprised three of their four playoff appearances. They've never won a division title. I'm going to say that again. They have never won a division title. Two World Series, no division titles. If you take a look through the Marlins' history, they've had a handful of good seasons. The last time they made the playoffs was in 2023. They had 84 wins. If you're not really familiar with, win counts in baseball, 84 is, I would say, slightly above average. Sometimes when you get 84 wins, you can eke into the playoffs. Baseball has an expanded playoff. 3 wildcard teams make it. So if you get 84, the Reds had little north of 80 wins this year. They made the playoffs. The Reds weren't very good. I was very happy they made it, but they weren't very good. So they eked into the playoffs and then just got crushed. 2020, they made the playoffs, had 31 wins in the COVID year. Not great. Lost in the National League Division Series 3-0. Besides those 2 great years, they're kind of the definition of futility. They've had a few more 80-win seasons in the late 2000s where that's another portion I'll get to here in a second. But they've had stretches where they've been pretty decent and they look to ramp it up and nothing really happens because they fall flat on their face. So the Marlins, throughout their franchise's history, have had plenty of great players. Miguel Cabrera famously won a World Series with the 2003 Marlins. That squad was chock full of talent. You had guys like Dontrell Willis, Jeff Conine, Juan Pierre, all really, really, really good players in their own right, winning the World Series on that 2003 squad. So they actually beat the Yankees in 2003 after having a couple, 70-ish win seasons. In 2002, they had 79 wins. So they were ramping it up and getting better. At the end of the late 90s, they were sold by their original owner to John Henry, who owns the Boston Red Sox now. He owned the Marlins for 2 seasons and ended up selling them to Jeffrey Loria, who owned the Marlins from 2002 to 2017. And within that period, 2002 to 2017, is really the vast majority of the history of the Florida/Miami Marlins. That's kind of the franchise's history, and you'll see kind of what I'm saying here in a second. So the Loria tenure was important because in 2002, he's got the team. 2003, they have a good core, win the World Series. After that, they rattle off a couple. They rattle off a couple 83 win seasons. Then they start to regress. 78 wins in 06, 71 wins in 07. Then they kind of get back to respectability. 84 in 08, 87 in 09, 80 in 2010. And right around this time is when they were attempting to get a new stadium in Miami. So previously, the Florida Marlins were playing at, I believe, Sun Life Park, which is where the Dolphins played. It was one of those shared stadiums with the Miami Dolphins and the Florida Marlins. It looked I remember as a kid watching SportsCenter, anytime you'd see Marlins highlights, it looked so goofy. It kind of reminded me of the Oakland situation with the A's and the Raiders. It just did not look like a baseball field. It was specifically designed for football, I believe. So the ownership, Loria, and Marlins president David Sampson, who actually is a content creator, he has a podcast that I quite enjoy, Nothing Personal with David Sampson. That's a really good show. And if you're curious about anybody, it's not even just baseball. If you're curious about learning the business behind the sports, David can take you behind the curtain, so to speak, because he was the president of a major sports franchise for 15 years, essentially. So he has a lot of content online talking about the Marlins, giving honest critiques about the way the team was run, the way he ran the team, their kind of futility, if you will. But the late 2000s was important because they were trying to get a new stadium. It was called Marlins Park. They got the deal through, which was a big deal. And this new stadium was supposed to be the mecca of baseball at that time. It was supposed to be baseball's shining example of the newest stadium in the league. They put all the bells and whistles on this thing when it debuted in 2012. They had famously the home run sculpture, which even casual sports fans might remember. If a Marlins player hit it out to left center field, there was this massive home run sculpture out there with like dolphins and a bunch of like Latin themed colors, and it was moving and et cetera, et cetera. It was some people called it an eyesore. I thought it was very unique. I liked it personally. Another thing they did at the stadium, which was a unique touch, they put the backstop behind the catcher and the umpire. Typically, they're just brick walls or they're just, green padding. This was a fish tank. They put fish tanks behind home plate as a ball stop, which was very unique. I personally really liked that. Animal rights groups had some questions, and I think in fairness, it's fish, whatever, we don't have to get into that, but it was a pretty unique feature that I quite enjoyed. The stadium was very big, it was cool, and they were trying to lure apathetic fans out to the ballpark. Famously, we know this with the Miami Heat and the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins less so, more so on the NBA side, but Miami has a reputation for kind of being like lazy, apathetic fans. Sometimes they'll show up when they win, obviously the LeBron era down there for the Heat, but other times they won't. And when they're not coming, the place looks cavernous. Obviously, the Marlins knew this. When they debuted the team in 2012, they wanted to give the Florida Marlins a complete new makeover, according to David Sampson. They changed the colors from this kind of like late 90s teal and pinstripes to the like black and orange and yellow. It was very bright. They changed the logo and they dropped the name Florida Marlins and picked up Miami Marlins to make it more South Florida like specific. They wanted to have nods to like Latin culture within the logos and the theming. And the other thing they did was they traded and picked up a lot of good players. So as I mentioned, the Marlins had a few 80-win seasons there in the late 2010s. So they thought, hey, we're going to ramp this up. We already have some good pieces. We're going to make some moves. And then 2012, we're going to be competitive. We're going all in. We're pushing our chips to the center of the table. They picked up guys like Jose Reyes, who was a marquee free agent. They were in contention for Albert Pujols. They already had dudes like Hanley Ramirez. They picked up Mark Burley, who was a really good pitcher. Heath Bell, a top reliever. And then they picked up Ozzie Guillen, the lightning rod himself, who won the World Series with the 2005 Chicago White Sox. He was a firebrand. He spoke his mind constantly. That could get under some people's skin. But he was a Latin manager. He was one of the best managers in Major League Baseball for a long period of time. Miami was like, we're going to do it. So they went all in for 2012. Even SportsCenter, Mainline ESPN was talking about this. What did they do? Well, they fell flat on their effing faces. They won 69 games. They finished in last place. It was a complete embarrassment. And then they blew it up. The next year, 2013, they had 62 wins. They were kind of in no man's land. Around that time, they did have some interesting players like Jose Fernandez, who famously passed away, unfortunately, in a boating accident. He was on track to become one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. Super talented, hard fastball thrower. They had guys like Dee Gordon. They had, obviously, Giancarlo Stanton, who won an MVP in 2017. Christian Yelich. They had a lot of good players, but didn't really see any success team-wise at that period in time. After that, they decided to sell some players, and the ownership was going to change hands. This time, Derek Jeter, the famous shortstop, and this is really where I wanted to talk about the Marlins and why this came to mind as one of the teams that was qualified for this list. So Derek Jeter leads an outside group of investors headed by real estate guy Bruce Sherman to take over the Marlins from Jeffrey Loria, to essentially get Loria to sell the team to Sherman. But once Sherman bought the Marlins, Derek Jeter would be in charge of the team and their operations. So he essentially was Sherman was a person who had enough capital to operationally hand control to Derek Jeter so he could essentially run his own team. Once Jeter gets in 2000 and I believe 17, 18, Derek Jeter completely guts the team. He completely cleans house in the executive roles. David Sampson, the guy I was talking about earlier, he's gone. All of the people who were kind of around the franchise from 2002 to 2017, the most successful period in the franchise's history, built a stadium, won a World Series, had a couple 80-win seasons in there. They were all gone. Derek Jeter was going to run the Marlins the way he wanted to, and it resulted in epic futility. Derek Jeter was way in over his head. He had no idea what he was doing. He pissed off a lot of the old guard and the franchise. Derek Jeter's tenure, which lasted from 2017 to 2022, but he had four seasons. One of them was the COVID-shortened season. The Marlins were consistently, besides the COVID year, one of the worst teams in baseball. They were in the 60-win category. They sold all of their good players, traded them away. Stanton, Christian Yelich, guys who won MVPs, who are perennial good players, got rid of all of those guys. And we're just kind of toiling in obscurity. Derek Jeter wanted a complete remake of the Miami Marlins. Fast forward to 2022, and it's clear that they're not going anywhere fast. They weren't good. They had sold all their good players. Derek Jeter essentially opts out. He retires as the CEO of the Marlins. He resigns. He's gone, and the Marlins are back to square one. Jeter got rid of all of their player capital. He gutted the one of the worst parts about the Derek Jeter tenure for the Marlins for me, and hearing Samson talk about this, it was interesting, is Jeter wanted to contrast himself so greatly from the old guard of the Marlins. He wiped out all of the new kind of like logos and branding and the cultural themes that the Marlins had implemented during the previous tenure, which at least made the Marlins unique. He wiped all of that out. They had generic black jerseys. They wiped out all of the orange, really. They had, they changed the logo to something I don't really care for. It was just ugly, and it felt bland and boring, and they easily became forgettable, which is unfortunate because you're a baseball franchise in Miami, Florida. The worst thing you could do is just be forgettable, be a nothing burger, because people aren't going to care and they're not going to show up. And that's exactly what happened. Derek Jeter had a 400% winning percentage, won 218 games, lost 327, as I mentioned before, one playoff appearance, Mickey Mouse COVID year, and his personality didn't quite mesh with running a baseball team. David Sampson critiqued him by saying he didn't understand the business side of baseball, and that was pretty clear. So Jeter's gone, and now there's a little bit of light here. They won 84 games in 2023, as I was saying. Then they were one of the worst teams in baseball in 2024. Upped it a little bit, 79 wins, 2025. We're pretty competitive throughout the year. So there is a little light here. But the Marlins are constantly like a fire sale away from tearing everything down. And that's really the theme of all of this. And to zoom out a little bit before I throw it back to Logan, I wanted to say that, with football is kind of monoculture. It's all over the place. Basketball, you can play in inner cities, and it's popular. It's during the winter. It's not really competing with anything. In baseball, it's kind of a regional sport, and some markets are stronger than others. Some fan bases are wired different than others. Miami, they didn't have a baseball team prior to their early 90s, so there wasn't like generations of fans, like a Cubs fan, for example, where that's just passed down through the generations. The Marlins started anew. Now, what was popular in South Florida, and still is to this day, is the game of baseball. Miami is like the Latin American capital of the Caribbean. It's one of the biggest Latin cities in the entire world. That culture is everywhere down there. And baseball and soccer are the two biggest games for, the Latin American experience from my observation. There's a lot of people down in South Florida who play baseball when they're growing up. The weather is great, so that bodes well for playing baseball. But the fact that they're not able to kind of capture the zeitgeist down in Miami, the pro team, is really unfortunate. I would argue there are more Yankees fans in South Florida than there are Marlins fans. And to wrap it up here, I want to kind of say that what are the Marlins' issues? What are their actual true issues? The Marlins are the least valuable franchise in Major League Baseball, below Cincinnati, below Pittsburgh, below Kansas City. Could you imagine a team in Miami being worth less, a less valuable asset than the Cincinnati Reds? And I'm not throwing the Reds under the bus, but that's crazy, especially with all the context around, Latin America and Miami loving baseball. That shouldn't happen. That should not happen. There's something off there. Miami, in general, should not have a team that's one of the lowest value in its sport. The other thing is the Miami Marlins are a cheap franchise, and that is really what rears its head in baseball. My team, the Cincinnati Reds, cheap franchise. Pittsburgh Pirates, cheap franchise. Oakland A's, famously cheap franchise. Throw the Marlins in there. From 2025 to 2019, or was it 18? One of those 2 years, they had a bottom 5 payroll in the league. Bottom 5 for a team in Miami. They weren't spending any money. They were elevating minor leaguers. They kind of act as a farm team for larger markets. And when you see all the fire sales that have happened throughout the Marlins' history, that kind of becomes apparent. So it's wild they won 2 World Series, but they are the definition of stepping on a rake, I would say, over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think the Marlins was, you could have a lot of picks with MLB. Definitely. There's a variety. I think you can make more arguments on the number of teams versus some other leagues. The Marlins is a perfect pick to my eyes because, like you said, with it being in Miami and the culture that is in that city and in that region, there is no reason why the Marlins should not be a top 10 market in the league. That is a complete organizational failure. That is a sign of bad ownership. And even me, who I'm more of a casual baseball fan, I'm well aware of Derek Jeter's failures and him trying to force the changing of the color of the guard there. And I distinctly remember, definitely the uniform changes and how he's cutting the rosters. And the fire sale label that you put on them is very accurate. They are known for that historically. I think, there are some interesting other picks that could have been made with baseball. Obviously, this is opinion. You could have talked about the Mariners. You could have talked about the Twins. You could have talked about not trying to just throw teams on the bus, the Rockies. But the point is, you can make an argument, pick your hill, and make your stand. But I think Miami is a great argument, not just because you have all these different factors in it. The market, the organization, the leadership, the cheapness. There's too many factors to really make a great, argument for another team. I think Miami is a great choice in the baseball world.
Thanks. And yeah, the Marlins, are they the worst team of all time? They do have 2 World Series wins. Colorado doesn't have a World Series win. However, when you demonstrate ability to win in the past, even if they may or may not have gotten lucky, although the 2 Marlins teams that did win the World Series were very, very memorable, very, very talented. Do you remember in 2K when you'd have those historic teams you could play as when you were selecting? That is one of those, if the show had that, one of those Marlins teams would have been in there. It would have been the hipster, the 2011 Oklahoma City Thunder, even if they didn't win. It would have been one of those kind of teams. The historic futility of the Marlins is something I thought was interesting because there's a lot of content online about that. YouTubers and podcasters, I mentioned David Sampson, all have gone in depth from an outside perspective and an interior perspective. With Sampson, it's one of the closest looks under the microscope you could have due to his proximity to ownership and building a stadium, winning a World Series. These are all, if you're involved in the business of sports, that is what this is. I mean, building a new stadium, winning a World Series, being bad, being good, trading away all of your players, and then in 2012 offseason, getting all these new players into the fold so you can make a push. I mean, he's done everything. And so when you have all of that context coupled with the market that they are not utilizing correctly, And maybe it'll never work down there. Who knows? Maybe that's why it's never worked, is because the fans just don't care enough. They like the Yankees more, etc., etc. I still struggle to believe that professional baseball couldn't work down there. But with that being said, you kind of mentioned this. We were talking about Derek Jeter, or this is where my mind went. So one of your picks also had a former player who went into the ownership sphere and fell flat on his face. Arguably the most famous example of all time. So who am I talking about, Logan?
We're talking about the Charlotte Hornets slash Bobcats slash Hornets again. And I kind of went back and forth on where do I want to start with this conversation? Do I want to start when they were founded? Do I want to start when they came back to the city of Charlotte? Or I should say, kind of revived, came back into that market. And I figured just because of what we're going to be talking further down the lane, I'm going to start with the foundation. And I think it's also going to make a really good point in terms of, let's say, NBA career record statistics in terms of franchises to make my point potentially a little bit stronger here. It all starts in 1985 where there's a movement by founder George Shinn who wanted to bring a professional basketball team to Charlotte, North Carolina. And they actually got approved by the NBA in 1988. So they weren't the only expansion team during this time. You have Miami, Minneapolis, and Orlando, pretty notable names that are still in the NBA. What I thought was very interesting, just on a side note, is, well, how did they pick the name of the Hornets? So it actually came up from the city's resistance during the Revolutionary War to occupation, which Lord Cornwallis, who is the leader of the Southern Army during the Revolutionary War for the British, referred to the city as a veritable hornet's nest of rebellion, which I thought was super cool. Be like, okay, that's some pretty good context for the name pick. I like that. So whenever you're starting a new team, there's an expansion draft. So in the 88-89 season, their inaugural season, some notable players that they had: Kelly Tripucka, Rex Chapman, Del Curry, Muggsy Bogues, some pretty, some faces for the franchise that you remember if you even paid half attention to the NBA. If you're even a casual fan, you recognize those names. Probably Del Curry the most because of his son, Steph, and of course Muggsy Bogues, the shortest man to ever play in the NBA. Believe it or not, in that first year, Muggsy Bogues would set the record for assists in a game with 19, and it wasn't broken until 2005. Of course, with most expansion teams, especially the NBA, which I feel like is really, really tough to come out swinging. First season, 20 wins, 62 losses. What was notable, though, and the hesitation to have a franchise begin in Charlotte, was the concern of attendance. However, they led the league in the NBA in attendance in their first year, and they would sell out 364 consecutive home games, which is basically 9 seasons. They were number one in attendance from their inaugural season. Going on to the next year, 89-90 season, once again, 1963, they fired their first head coach, Dick Harter, midway through the season. Now, I will put a side note in. I am not going to talk about every single player or every single head coach that they've had, more that I think notable ones, because if I'm discussing a franchise over 35 years and I have to single out every single name, it's going to be a very long podcast. So I apologize if I didn't mention a player, a coach, or an event. Bear with me here. There's a lot of information. But one of the first notable draft picks coming into the 90-91 season in that draft is guard Kendall Gill. He was on the All-Rookie Team award that year. He was the point leader for the following season, 91-92. And for his career, he averaged 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. So pretty solid pick for them. A guy that you could put as a landmark on the team. The following year, I should say, they finished that season 26-56. So still struggling. Following year, another notable draft pick. With the first pick in the 91 draft, they took power forward Larry Johnson, University of Nevada. He won Rookie of the Year. Following year, he was All-NBA. He's a 2-time All-Star. So he's a pretty solid player, a good pick for them coming out. They did much better that year. They were able to stay competitive all the way up until March, not eliminate from playoffs, but they did finish 31-51. And then in the 92-93 season, with the start of the draft, they would arguably draft the best player of all time in franchise history. And that is Georgetown center Alonzo Mourning. What makes him so fantastic? Well, he's in the Hall of Fame, 7-time All-Star, 2-time block champion, 2006 NBA champion, 2-time All-NBA, of course, All-Rookie, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, and 2-time All-Defense teams. Pretty good accolades for that career. It was their first winning season. 44 wins, 38 losses. It was their first playoff berth, and they finished 5th in the conference. They actually, in their first playoff appearance, they upset the Boston Celtics, but they would fall in the second round to the New York Knicks. And you're going to notice this as a trend. I'm just going to go ahead and let you know now that the Charlotte Hornets have never made it past the second round in their entire franchise history. That following year, finished 41-41. They narrowly missed the playoffs. 94-95 season, they were able to get back on track. 50 wins, 32 losses, a return to the playoffs, but they were bounced out of the first round by the Chicago Bulls. And then I would say another notable error here is that in the 95-96 season, the Hornets decided to trade Alonzo Mourning to the Heat for Glenn Rice, Matt Geiger, and Cleve Reeves. And Glenn Rice, not to throw him under the bus, but he was still a very good player. You know, in his career, 18 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, 2 assists, 3-time All-Star, 2000 NBA champion, 2-time All-NBA, All-Rookie, All-Star MVP. Nice accolades as well. Of course, they paired him up with Larry Johnson. They had brought in Kenny Anderson at that time for an injured Muggsy Bogues. But they finished 41-41 again, but they were not able to make the playoffs on that. So the following season, Kenny Anderson decided to decline to re-sign. And then after a year of basically trading away Alonzo Mourning, they decided to trade one of their other starting pieces with Larry Johnson, who was shipped to the Knicks for Anthony Mason. And this is probably the worst trade in their franchise history because I think Hornets fans deeply regret and think about what if. And it's not that trade, it's the one that happened during the draft. So with their 13th overall pick, they had drafted Kobe Bryant, who they then traded to the Lakers for Vlade Divac. Vlade Divac is a very good player. Obviously, Kobe Bryant would have been, it's different with him in LA, but he could have been an icon for that team. Could have been there for a very long time. So a big what-if scenario there. And, following, that season, they 54 wins, 28 losses, making it back to the playoffs, but of course they were bounced out in the first round. Following year, 97-98, 51-31 record, back-to-back playoffs, first time in franchise history. They would get to the second round, only be stopped by the Bulls again. So going on from 1988 to 2002, this is the last few years that the original Charlotte Hornets would be in town. So in the 98-99 season, a lockout occurred, and the season didn't start till February. Only had 50 games to start. They also decided to trade Glenn Rice away to the Lakers for Eddie Jones and Eldon Campbell. 26-24 record, did not make the playoffs. Another guy notable that they drafted the following year, 99 draft, was point guard Baron Davis, 3rd overall. 49-33 record, returned to the playoffs where they lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in the first round. This is around the time that the league was taking note of the decline in popularity with the team. A large part of this was the discontent with the owner, George Shen. There had been many reports that why did he trade Alonzo Mourning if he was this good? Why did he trade Larry Johnson? And he didn't want to pay the market value. That's basically what it was. He's cheap. And this is at the point where a very famous player, arguably one of the GOATs, my GOAT, Michael Jordan, had started to have negotiations to be a part-time owner. He wanted in. But the talks collapsed. Shen did not want to give up control of basketball operations to Jordan. And during this time, when I had mentioned, hey, they were first in attendance for 9 seasons, they dropped down to 11th during that year. So cracks in the foundation there. The following year, 46-36 record, 2001 season. They were able to upset the third seeded Heat that year, but then of course they lose the Milwaukee Bucks in 7 games. And then in the 01-02 season, which was the last year of the original Charlotte Hornets, they finished 44-38. They defeated the Orlando Magic in the first round, and they lost to the New Jersey Nets, not the Jets, for the 5 games in the semi-conference final. At this point, they were 29th in attendance. Huge drop-off at this point. During this playoff run, before they even were eliminated, the NBA had approved a deal for them to move to New Orleans. I want to give you a little bit more context to this deal. So not only because of how the owner, Shin, had handled some of his transactions in the NBA, he's starting to get a lot of personal flack. There were some accusations, some legal accusations back in 97, which hurt his personal image for sure. He was not happy with the current Coliseum that they were playing in, even though it was just built in 1988. It was considered state of the art. Did not have the number of luxury boxes that he wanted. So in March 26, 2001, I didn't know this, but Charlotte and Vancouver Grizzlies, were both applying to relocation for Memphis in Tennessee. The Grizzlies won. So back to the drawing board, Shin basically issued an ultimatum. He wanted a new arena built in the city, more luxury boxes, but he didn't want to pay a single dime for it, or he'd leave town. The city initially refused, and Shin was looking into the teams in Norfolk, Virginia, Louisville, Kentucky, and St. Louis. It would have been really cool to have a Louisville team, although it would have been probably a bad franchise, but hey, would have been nice. Basically, they were getting to the point where they were talking about actually building the stadium. They're coming up with it, and that's the current day stadium, which is Spectrum Center. Shin was actually really happy with this idea, and he withdrew his application to leave the city. However, the mayor shot himself in the foot here, so while this was going through, he vetoed a living wage ordinance, or basically minimum wage, for city workers. So this prompted a lot of local leaders to oppose the referendum. They thought it was immoral, which, yeah, I agree with. You know, you got to pay your people, your city employees, at least minimum wage. The fact that they weren't doing that before is a little wild. But because this referendum failed for this new arena, basically they would not consider building it unless Shin sold the team. That was basically their set point. They were not moving off of it. And the NBA actually came out and they said Shin did an awful job. He alienated his fans, but they can't force him to sell the team because their job is to protect the owners. You cannot allow this type of pressure to happen from the public because other owners would be concerned. You'd be giving over a lot of power, a lot of leverage. So, they go to New Orleans. It gets approved. The New Orleans had actually lost their team back in 79 when their Jazz moved to Salt Lake City. So during this time frame from 01, 02, all the way up to the 04-05 season, Charlotte did not have a team, but something was working in the background. So on December 18th, 2002, a group led by Black Entertainment Television founder Robert L. Johnson was awarded the franchise. He was the first African-American majority owner in all major U.S. professional sports. Side note, one of the minority owners at this time was the rapper Nelly. All right. I had to mention that because that made me laugh. I'm like, why? Anyway, I want to talk about the team name. So why did they pick the Bobcats? Well, it was from a list. It was either the Bobcats, the Dragons, and the Flight. And the fans actually voted for the Flight. It had won the contest. But it was deemed too abstract, and when you're in the middle of the Iraq War, it's not... That was the thought of the ownership there, and I can understand that. So they began their construction of their new Coliseum in 2003. And then this is where Michael Jordan steps into the picture, and he is the reason why I picked this franchise. One of the greatest basketball players of all time, however, This man had double the tenure of Jeter, over 10 years. Just imagine that you're playing NBA 2K basketball and you're the GM and you are doing all these trades and it works for you, but real life basketball doesn't work that way. And I'm going to dive a lot into that. You're going to see this. I guess the theme is any type of talent that they would draft, they would flood the roster with veterans, so these younger guys could not develop. They would get good enough to be mediocre, struggle for a few years, and then blow it up, restart, and this is the cycle. So let me dive a little bit more into it. So they had another expansion draft, of course, heading into the 04-05 season. I would say the really one notable guy out of this expansion draft, and for me, I had forgotten his name in the time of history, but shout out to Gerald Wallace. Dude is an absolute baller. I did not realize how good he was until I really did a deep dive with the Hornets here. Basically, they would, acquiring all these different players, they would make a trade, get some of this roster off, and they would get the second pick in the NBA draft. And they would pick Emeka Okafor, the center from Connecticut. Coming into that season, of course, finished 18-64. They never won 2 games in a row that year, which is interesting. But Okafor did win the Rookie of the Year. So promising start. They're relaying the foundation down. The following year in 2005, they drafted Raymond Felton, who's a notable name in the Charlotte history. I wouldn't say he's an all-star player, but he was a solid piece for them, a good guard, and Sean May. What I want to note with these players is they were both North Carolina products. They had just won the national championship this year. You'll see a trend where Michael Jordan likes to take his North Carolina fellow alumni. So some notable players, I'm going to do this with every year. What are some notable players in the draft that they could have had? And just in general, what did that class look like? Number 1 pick, Andrew Bogut. Number 3, Darren Williams. Number 4, Chris Paul. 10, Andrew Bynum. 17, Danny Granger. And 30, David Lee. These names that I put up are because they have been accolade-winning players. I realize that there are some very good role players that could have been in these drafts. I'm not going to list 20-some players out every single draft. In their second season, finished 26-56. Okafor had a season-ending ankle injury, and this is where, all right, we have an injury to one of our big men, and it's going to keep popping its head up here. Gerald Wallace came out with career record stats up to this point. He's very well known as a defensive player. 15 points a game, 2 blocks a game, 2.5 steals a game. That's phenomenal from a non-big man. And then Sean May, the other draft pick from North Carolina, had a season-ending knee injury. 06-07 season. This draft is notorious for one of the biggest busts of all time. With the number 3 spot, they would take Adam Morrison from Gonzaga, the Larry Bird clone, so they thought. Coming out of college, 28 points a game, 40% from the 3, 6'10". In the preseason, 24 points a game. Some other players notable in that draft, Andre Bargnani, LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy, Rudy Gay, Rajon Rondo, Kyle Lowry, Paul Millsap. So their idea was with this trio of Morrison, Okafor, and Gerald Wallace, that would be their starting foundation. They would finish 33-49 record. They had the worst offense in the league that year. In terms of stats, Morrison had his best year, honestly, in his freshman year, his rookie year in the NBA with 11 points a game, 3 rebounds a game, 2 assists. And Wallace is continuing the ball. You're going to see him have the phenomenal steals a game, blocks a game. And then in the 07-08 season, the draft, 8th pick overall, they take North Carolina, Brandon Wright. Some other picks. This is the Greg Oden, Kevin Durant draft, Al Horford, Mike Conley. Realistically, this is a team that could continue to use depth in the bigs. Right after their pick, Joakim Noah. A couple picks later, Thaddeus Young. Some other names, Rodney Stuckey, Marco Bellinelli, Jason Smith, Gerald Dudley, Wilson Chandler, and Marcus Hall. This is where you would start to see MJ really start to make some trades. And this would be also a theme with some of these veteran players. They would trade away their first pick, or their pick, Brandon Wright, who they'd just taken 8th overall, for Jason Richardson from the Warriors, who's a phenomenal scorer. The goal was for him to be the scoring output for this team since they were so good defensively. At this point, they had kind of jumped around coaches a little bit, and they had decided to take Sam Vincent. Who the hell is Sam Vincent? I'll tell you. Coming into that, in the 07-08 season, he had one coaching resume piece. He was a one-year assistant coach to the Mavs. However, Sam Vincent was a teammate of Michael Jordan for 2 seasons with the Bulls. Some notable names that he skipped over: Paul Silas, Stan Van Gundy, Mike Fratello, Lionel Hollins, Herb Williams. So MJ's having his hand a little bit too much in the pot here. That's going to continue. So they would finish 32-50 that year. Morrison would tear his ACL in the preseason, missing the entire 08 season. Morrison, hint, hint, would never be the same guy again. He would no longer be prevalent after this point. Sam Vincent was fired after his first year as coach. Okay, brought in some guys with some inexperience. So who were they going to hire? Larry Brown. Heavy defensive mindset. Just to put in perspective what Larry Brown is, if you don't know him, NBA champion in 04, coached the Pistons when they beat the Lakers. He has won an NCAA division championship in 1988 with Kansas as well. He's won Coach of the Year with the NBA in 2001. He's a 2-time NBA All-Star Game head coach. And he had been a part of staff multiple times for Team USA in the Olympics. So a very established coach. If you don't know who Larry Brown is, you probably don't know a whole lot about basketball in general in terms of the history. Phenomenal guy. 08-09 season, 9th overall pick, DJ Augustine. This is the Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook draft. Could have took Brook Lopez, Roy Hibbert, DeAndre Jordan, Gordon Dragic in that time. And then their 20th overall pick, who they would trade to get, you probably know this name, you might remember him, Alexis Ajinka.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't remember him, that's because he was garbage. He's a developmental guy that came out of France, I believe. And I think his career average is like maybe 2 points, 4 points a game. That's my point is, I'm not trying to trash Ajinka, but there's a lot of controversy behind that pick with him. So with Larry Brown, who's a very defensive mindset, they became so much more efficient. They were known for a kind of a grit and grind kind of team. Very slow offensive pace and scoring. They would be scoring in the 80s, 90s consistently, winning multiple games by 1 point, losing multiple games by 1 point. So I had mentioned this trade with Jason Richardson. Well, guess what? They decided to trade him away. Basically 1 year on the roster. Jason Richardson, Jared Dudley for Rajah Bell, Boris Diaw, and Sean Singletary. Adam Morrison and Shannon Brown would also be traded not too far after that for Vladimir Bogdanovich. Jumping into the next season, because I just don't want to go any further with that team. 35-47, poor record. 09-10 season, 12th overall pick, Gerald Henderson. Blake Griffin, James Harden draft, Tyreek Evans, Steph Curry at 7, DeRozan at 9. They missed out on Jrue Holiday at 17, Jeff Teague at 19. Emeka Okafor, one of the earliest signature pieces of this team, was traded to the New Orleans Hornets for Tyson Chandler. The goal was Tyson Chandler was a phenomenal big man. He's athletic. He's over 7 foot. The man just couldn't stay healthy because if you're over 7 foot and you weigh close to, 280 pounds, you're going to have some knee problems. The team continued to struggle. And, of course, midway through that season, Steven Jackson, who was disgruntled with the Warriors, was traded to the team, trying to be once again that offensive piece because they just traded Jason Richardson. So they traded away Rajah Bell and Vladimir Bogdanovich. So the trade was actually pretty positive, even though I'm sounding negative. He would lead the team in scoring. They would be 21-20 in their first 41 games of the season. Gerald Wallace, the man, would be the first ever All-Star in franchise history that year. But of course, MJ was not done. Near the All-Star break, AC Law, Ronald Murray, and an unprotected 2014 first-round pick was traded for Tyrus Thompson. He was a good defender, versatile. That was the reason behind it. However, during this time, Robert L. Johnson, who was the majority owner, decided to sell his shares of the team due to some financial difficulties. Who bought the rest of the shares? Minority owner Michael Jordan. So the owner and head of basketball operations controls it all. He'd be the first ever NBA player to be the majority owner of any franchise. The team would actually finish 44-38, getting the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. They would face the Orlando Magic, who was led by Dwight Howard. That infamous team. They got swept 0-4. 2010-11 season. Just so I'm not dragging on here, they would then trade away Alexis Ajinka. And, well, I should say this. Because they drafted Alexis Ajinka, let me correct myself. They did not have the first-round pick in this draft because they made a trade to get 2 picks in that draft. They would have had the 16th overall pick. Who could they have gotten realistically at that time? Eric Bledsoe or Avery Bradley, who would have been very solid pieces for their team. They would take Ajinka and Tyson Chandler, who they had just received in the past season or two, and trade him for Eric Dampier, Edward Nahiro, Matt Carroll, and cash with the Mavs. Who the hell are these guys? I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't want to do a whole deep dive on it. But the whole point is why they made the trade. It was a cap space trade. They traded for Demore for basically $13 million. They cut him. They get the cap space to open up. Tyson Chandler, who'd be going to the Mavs, would become a notable figure with that team. He would go on to win a championship and given a Defensive Player of the Year with him. So that worked out for him. Kudos to Tyson Chandler. They would start out 9-19, and then they would fire Hall of Famer Larry Brown. They would bring in Paul Silas, who was the Hornets head coach previously, and had taken them to 3 straight playoff appearances. This is probably one of the, just because I'm a big fan of Gerald Wallace, researching all this, in February they decided to trade Gerald Wallace away to the Portland Trail Blazers. Dante Cunningham, Sean Marks, Joe Brizabella, 2011 first-round pick, and a 2014 first-round pick. They got a haul for him. 34-48 record, missed playoffs. It's time for the rebuild. So basically at this point, MJ had made the decision, I am going to step down as the head of basketball operations. He'd give control to Rod Higgins. And the new GM would be Rich Cho, who was the former GM of the Trailblazers. They had the 9th spot overall in that draft. And one of their better drafts that they've ever made, they decided to take a guard from UConn, Kemba Walker. This is the Kyrie Irving draft. Klay Thompson at 11, Kawhi 15, Nikola Vucevic at 16, Jimmy Butler at 30. They would make another trade during this process in the offseason. Steven Jackson, Sean Livingston, and a 19th pick from Portland to get center Bismack Biyombo and Corey Maggette. This is the lockout year, and this is one of the worst seasons of all time. They had the 3rd longest losing streak in the NBA history, 23 in a row. The margin of victory was negative 13 points. They fired Paul Silas as the head coach. A record of 7-59. To put in context, the second worst team that year was the Wizards, who had 20 wins. So they got lapped up pretty good. Now, this is at the point where the Hornets would be a bad team, but they wouldn't be bad enough to really get those key guys in the draft. They had the 2nd overall pick in 2012-13 season. Who did they miss out on at the number 1 pick? Anthony Davis. Who did they decide to take at their 2 pick? A teammate of Anthony Davis, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, who was this raw physical specimen. I would describe him as, if you've ever seen a football player play basketball, that's Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. He is the worst shooting form I have ever seen in a professional NBA player. Who did they miss out on? Number 3, Bradley Beal. 5, notable name, not in the NBA but college, Thomas Robinson. Number 6, Damian Lillard. 7, Harrison Barnes. 9, Andre Drummond. Basically, everybody drafting around Michael Kidd-Gilchrist had a better career, except for Thomas Robinson. Basically, 2 days before that draft, though, I should note that Corey Maggette was traded to the Pistons for Ben Gordon and a 2013 first-round pick. New head coach again, Mike Dunlap. They started the season 7-5, followed by an 18-game losing streak, finishing record of 21-61 on the year, second worst in the NBA. Kemba Walker was noted for having a good bump up for scoring as the year progressed, and Bismack Biyombo was drafted as intended as a shot blocker. Mike Dunlap got fired again. So, new coach. 13-14 season, they decided to bring in Steve Clifford, who I believe might be actually the longest tenured coach in their franchise history. They had the 4th overall pick. Who did they take? Cody Zeller, one of the Zeller brothers. This is the really weird Anthony Bennett draft where nobody knows anything. And looking back on it, there's not a whole lot of phenomenal players coming out. 2, Victor Oladipo. 11, Michael Carter-Williams. 15, Giannis. This is the Giannis draft. 27, Rudy Gobert. My question is, why did you just draft Cody Zeller if you just traded assets to get Bismack Biyombo the year before? Interesting take. However, they did have the best signing in their franchise history, Al Jefferson, coming into this year. I believe he's 28, 29 years old. I had mentioned that they had drafted DJ Augustine earlier. They decided to let him go. They would finish 27-30 record at the All-Star break. Pick it up, 43-39, 7th seed. Al Jefferson was hard carrying this team. This is not Kemba being the all-star that we remember. He's still trying to jump up there. They were top 5 in defense, bottom 5 in offense that year. Who did they meet in the playoffs? LeBron-led Miami Heat super team. They were swept. Awesome. 2014-15 season. NJ put in a request for the NBA to change the name of the Bobcats to the Hornets. Why? Because the New Orleans Hornets changed their name to the god-awful Pelicans. And a terrifying mascot, by the way, if you remember that. This is the year that it looked like it was going to come together. They had some previous trades that they made. They had the 9th overall pick. They had the 24th overall pick. They can solidify the roster with some of the talent they have with Biyombo, with Kemba Walker, with Al Jefferson. At the 9th pick, they take Noah Vonleh. If you know anything about Noah Vonleh, he did not work out. And I'll get a little bit further into it. With the 24th pick, they had actually drafted Shabazz Napier and traded him to the Heat for P.J. Harrison, the 26th pick, and Samaje Harrison and cash. This is the 3rd year in a row of them drafting a big man. I don't know why. I guess they keep going back to the machine, trying to get a replacement for, I guess, when an aging Al Jefferson comes up, because none of these guys are being productive as they thought they would. This is the Andrew Wiggins draft, Joel Embiid, Julius Randle, Zach LaVine, Nikola Jokic. They would sign Lance Stevenson and Marvin Williams in the offseason. This is the point of where I'm trying to make, is that they are having all this young talent here, and then they'll go sign a veteran to supplement the roster. And what they'll do, the coaches will do, they will put the veterans in the starting lineup, and then the minutes are limited for these younger guys. They would finish 33-49 that season, 9th in the Eastern Conference, just missing the playoffs. Noah Vonleh played 5 games that year. He was sent to the G League. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist would have a season-ending shoulder surgery, an injury. This would be the start of the end for Michael Kidd-Gilchrist in his career. He would hurt the shoulder multiple times, and I'll get into that. So, let's see. Have the Hornets learned their lesson? In the 2015-2016 season, with the 9th pick overall, they take Frank the Tank Kaminsky from Wisconsin. This is the 4th year in a row they take a big man. This is the Karl Anthony Towns draft. D'Angelo Russell, Kristaps Porzingis, Hingis Tingis. My favorite video of the NBA of all time. And 13, Devin Booker. They had just gotten Lance Stevenson the year before, correct? wasn't playing great. They decided to trade him off to get Matt Barnes and Spencer Hawes. Gerald Henderson and Noah Vonleh were packaged for Nicholas Batum, the Frenchman, who was actually really, really good. But when you're trading for him at the end of his career, I don't know how much he had left in the tank, and he did not have a whole lot left in the tank. So this was the year that the draft, or I should say the salary cap had the huge jump. And this is when the Warriors would sign, I believe, Kevin Durant because of this money cap jump. So all these teams were throwing this money out to sign all these guys because, hey, the money's jumped. We got to get a guy. We got to overpay him. I thought I had written this down, but Nicholas Batum's contract was something like 4 years for like $140 million. It was basically like a max deal for a guy that was a solid 3-and-D wing player. This would haunt them for a few years. They did flip Matt Barnes for Luke Ridnour and Jeremy Lamb, and they signed Lynn Sanity, Jeremy Lamb, and Tyler Hansborough. So now it looks like, okay, they're making a little bit of a push with all these veteran signings. Let's see what they can do. Christmas time, they are 16-13 on the record. Defense is solid. They are becoming noted for taking the fourth most threes in the sport. All-Star game, 27-26. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist would return, and 3 games later, he would re-injure his shoulder and be out the rest of the year. They would trade P.J. Hairston and 2 second-round picks for Courtney Lee, very solid 3-and-D player. And they would end the season on a 21-8 run, finishing 48-34. This would be 6th in the conference. This would be the first time in franchise history they are top 10 offense, top 10 defense. They would be matched up to the Miami Heat again. Not with LeBron, not with Bosh, but Luol Deng and Hassan Whiteside and Dwayne Wade still at the edge of his prime. They would go 0-2, and then they would win their first playoff game as the official Charlotte Hornets, the rebrand. And then they would be winning the series 3-2, and then they would lose it. They blew it. I'm going to start picking this up speed-wise for us just because as we get closer and closer, there's a little bit less to analyze with just the historical context. A lot of these players we're still evaluating because they are still in the league. Most of them are. They're not too many years off. So in the 16-17 season, 22nd pick overall, Malachi Richardson. This is the Ben Simmons, Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown draft. They would finish the season 36-46, 11th spot in the East. Kemba Walker would be the second all-time or second all-star for the team in franchise history during this year. They would make a trade, Marco Bellinelli, Miles Plumlee, in the 17-18 offseason to get Dwight Howard. They would sign Michael Carter-Williams, former Rookie of the Year. They would draft Malik Monk, Kentucky guard. This is Jason Tatum, De'Aaron Fox, Larry Markkinen draft. They would start 8-9, pretty average mid-season. Again, Kemba would make his second All-Star appearance that year and would break the record for franchise of most threes scored. They would finish 36-46. Once again, Malik Monk, a young rookie, would only get 13 minutes a game and regulated to the G League. The reason why was the lack of defense, and then he was undersized. In the 18-19 offseason, they would fire head coach Clifford and the GM Cho. They would hire Mitch Kupchak as GM and James Barango, head coach, who is a longtime Greg Popovich assistant. I bring this up because you would start to see coaching style and favoritism towards previous Spurs players come into play here. They would sign Tony Parker, a 35-year-old guard, at the edge of his career. Another fantastic trade that the Hornets don't absolutely regret is the 11th pick overall. They took Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who then traded him immediately to the LA Clippers, and then decided to take Miles Bridges. In the second round, they would take Devontae Graham. This is actually probably the best draft that they've had, talent-wise, as a franchise, between the first and the second round. This is the Luka draft class, Trae Young. They would then trade Dwight Howard post-draft for Timofey Mozgov, And then they would trade Timothy Mozgov 2 days later to get back Bismack Biyombo and 2 second-round picks. He had left for Toronto, and he had come back during the salary cap expansion. They start the season 18-18. Kemba would put up career numbers, 25 points a game, All-NBA third team, 60-point game, multiple 40-point games. He was in his prime. He was the guy. He was the offense. Final record of 39-43, 2 games shy of being the 8th seed. 2019-2020 draft, another tank season. 12th pick spent on P.J. Washington. Zion draft, John Morant. Kemba Walker was going in free agency. He wanted to stay with the team. He wanted the bag. He wanted to take the max deal. He would accept a 4-year, $140 million max deal. Perfect. He's with the team. And then they would trade him to the Celtics for Terry Rozier and a second-round pick. Rozier was coming off this really hot postseason where Kyrie Irving had injured his knee and he had stepped in, and he looked like he's an offensive juggernaut there for that team. That season, 1836 at the All-Star game, 23-42 final record. That's a misprint. I'm going to say, regardless, they did not make the playoffs that year. P.J. Washington was a second all-rookie team. Graham and Rozier had led the team in scoring. New era, 2000 to 21 season, 2020 to 21 season. Third pick, LaMelo Ball, one of the more interesting basketball families in our recent times. This is the Anthony Edwards draft, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey. They would make a trade with the Boston Celtics to get Gordon Hayward and 2 second-round picks. And basically they would waive Nicholas Batum in this terrible contract at this time. This was after Gordon Hayward had that horrific injury with his leg, and they were basically banking on him making his recovery and bouncing back to some form of his near all-star status. Basically, LaMelo would have a phenomenal rookie season. He was in a race for the Rookie of the Year with Anthony Edwards. They would finish 33-39. And this is the year that they implemented the play-in games. They got in as a 10 seed to lose to the Pacers, I believe by like 30-something points. 21-22 season, they had drafted 11th pick overall, James Bouknight. Interesting name. But yeah, James Bouknight, Cade Cunningham draft, Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Alperen Sengun draft. They did not extend Malik Monk. Part of this, the extension, why is because he was doing better. He was putting up games. He was a notable booger sugar enjoyer, and he had failed the NBA drug policy multiple times for that, so they didn't extend him. They did give an extension to Devontae Graham, their best second-round pick of all time, in which they would trade him to get a first-round pick, and Austin Brown, Ty Sullivan. They'd also trade Mason Plumlee, bring in Ish Smith, Kelly Oubre Jr. They all-star record break by then, 29-31. They would trade Ish Smith at this point for Montrezl Harrell. LaMelo was an all-star in his second season. A lot of promise. They would also go on to sign Isaiah Thomas after that Ish Smith trade. They finished 43-39, once again, 10th seed in the play-in. They would lose the Atlanta Hawks 132-103. Bottom 10 defense. This is at the point where the Barango as head coach was fired, leading into the 22-23 season. Part of that was because of his short lease, his confrontation with younger players, his relationship with the team. And whereas all the other teams in the past have been a grit and grind, he had been a super fast-paced offense, which was very fun to watch. I remember seeing a bunch of highlights of that team where he coached, and just very up and down the court, which makes sense for a younger team. They would rehire Steve Clifford as head coach that year, and in that draft, 13th pick overall, take Jalen Duran, and with the 15th pick, they take Mark Williams. Duran was traded to the Knicks for a 24 first-round pick and 4 second-round picks. This is the Banchero draft with Jalen Williams at 12. Miles Bridges at this time, who looked like a great wing player for them, young guy, was arrested for domestic abuse. Now, he was if I remember correctly, pleaded not guilty, and of course he's back in the league. He's playing again. LaMelo Ball was injured multiple times at this point. He only played 36 games. Multiple other players were injured, finishing 27-55. Coming into the 23-24 season, this is when MJ sold the majority stakes of ownerships to Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall, and he remained as a minority owner. He no longer had control of basketball operations. This is when 21-62, second overall pick, taking Brandon Miller. 24-25 season, 1963 record, sixth overall pick to James Loon. And then this season, they had taken their fourth overall pick, Knuppel. Oh, okay, I can breathe a little bit. So why did I pick the Charlotte Hornets out of all these teams in the NBA? Because there are definitely some bad teams. You had mentioned the Clippers. I could have made an argument for the T-Wolves and some other franchises. Well, in their 35 years, in which I'm including the first-time Charlotte Hornets, they had 11 winning seasons, 11 winning records. I had mentioned before that they'd only make it to the semifinals. They have never made it further than that. Basically, 7 out of their 12 playoff appearances were with that original team. Not the MJ, not the Bobcats, not the later Hornets, with that original team. Let's see. They only had the 5, of course, after when they came back to Charlotte, or when the new franchise started in Charlotte. Their best season of all time was in the 96-97 year. 54-28. Their highest seed ever attained was the 4th seed. In terms of records, so this is comparing the rest of the league here. All-time regular season record, if you include both the old and the new, Hornets, Bobcats, Hornets, 1,193 wins, 1,602 losses. That is a 43% winning percentage. That is 27th of all 30 current NBA franchises in percentage. In terms of playoff record, they are 23-40, 37%. However, if you were to split the franchise between the start and then the Bobcats/Hornets revival, at the start they would be a 516 to 518 record, basically 50% if you round it up. The revival, Bobcats, Hornets, 677 to 1,084 record. That is 38%. That would be the lowest winning percentage of all time among all franchises in the NBA. T-Wolves at 42, Brooklyn Nets at 43, and the LA Clippers at 43%. So this is a really long-winded say. I wanted to dive into the history, but this is a team that had success in the 80s and into the 90s. It looked like a promising franchise. Some personal dilemmas and city decisions made that franchise move away. They were able to bring back their beloved basketball team with the Bobcats, where a man who was seen as the greatest of all time, who had little to no experience on how to run a team, was given the keys. And this team would consistently have talent bring in veterans, maybe a good year or two season, mediocre, and then they would trade these pieces away. They would not let the pot simmer. They were not great at developing some of the young talent, and whenever they didn't show, they would ship them out. So this is a team that the NBA gets more flack on this than I feel like a lot of other leagues, where it's like it's almost encouraged the tank, and the lottery tries to prevent that. But this is a team that would always try to be as best as they possibly can, to a fault, to where they were never better than average, and they were more consistently bad, but not terrible. So they could never really get to that next echelon to really bring in a guy that could be a difference maker, because they would either miss out on these draft spots where they were a pick or two behind of these generational talents, or if they did have some talents, they would decide to trade them away, these pieces. So it's a frustrating franchise that's not too far from my backyard. I think, and it's a fan base that has become apathetic, which was once one of the best fan bases in NBA history. So it's a lot to dive in with that. but that is my nomination, is the Charlotte Hornets for all the reasons above.
So I didn't know they were angling to be called the Charlotte Flight. That is awesome. I would have loved that way more. And the
I
rationale
agree.
behind the Iraq War is probably like legitimate for the time. But I think about all the WNBA teams named like the Chicago Sky or something like that. The Charlotte Flight would have been awesome. Like Oklahoma City Thunder, Charlotte Flight. Anyway, from my perspective, the Charlotte Hornets slash Bobcats are really interesting because NBA fans have a lot of nostalgia, even if they didn't necessarily watch or grow up with a certain franchise. And one of the defining franchises for the NBA in the 90s in terms of nostalgia is certainly the Charlotte Hornets. I remember, and I know you remember, when we were growing up, there was a substitute teacher we had named Mr. Reese, and the guy was pretty old, but he had this Charlotte Hornets starter jacket, and he had that shit on. I mean, like, it was legit. And I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, who is this guy that has this, like, Charlotte Hornets jacket? I never asked him about his NBA fandom or if he knew anything about basketball. For all I know, he could have picked it up at Goodwill and had just been like wearing it. Not talking about him like financially. I'm just saying like he could have just bought a random jacket. But that was one of those starter jackets were legitimate, and the Charlotte Hornets ones with the colors and the purple and the teal, it was so 90s. They had a lot of great players, Baron Davis, Larry Johnson, and yet they never really won anything. They were never very relevant beyond some memories here or there. And then the new iteration of it. First off, the Charlotte Bobcats absolutely zero aura at all. I can't ever really remember them being competitive whatsoever. You would think that at these like frat parties there would be people going and grabbing Charlotte Bobcats like throwback jerseys now. Absolutely not. Like I guess the one you could do is Adam Morrison, but he sucked, so why would you want to wear it? They were just completely and totally irrelevant besides like a little bit of Kemba Walker, and you had Jared Wallace, who was not really a star in terms of, notoriety. He was a very good basketball player, but he wasn't super marketable. And then when Michael Jordan buys the team, it's hubris, it's mismanagement, and I always thought that Michael Jordan's tenure as the owner of the Charlotte Hornets could be summarized through its legacy, in that it did work out for Michael Jordan financially, but reputationally, it kind of put an asterisk next to his like post playing career resume. They were never very good, they were never competitive, and when they were decent, they were just kind of in the mix for, lower playoff seed. It was never they were never really any threat to win the championship, which is ultimately what you want as an owner because that's going to help you financially. But with all the franchise valuations rising, Michael Jordan was able to get a good financial deal when he sold his majority stake. It solidified him as like a legitimate billionaire. He was always a billionaire. Now he's just like, he sold the majority stake of an NBA team. He's got that cash now. He can do whatever he wants forever. However, his management style and his preference for, like you were saying, North Carolina players and these kind of like twitchy guards to build your franchise around, it never really materialized. And people will always have a certain amount of, they're going to look at Michael Jordan's ownership and they're like, he wasn't that good. And he wasn't, because they never threatened for the playoffs very regularly. They were never in contention for a championship. And that's really what you want. So, in the end, the Hornets, it's really unfortunate because I didn't realize the sellout streak and how popular they were in the 90s. And that goes to show you the strength of nostalgia and how many people remember the good old days with the Charlotte Hornets. The Bobcats, I think, coming in, now obviously they couldn't have been named the Charlotte Hornets because they had the New Orleans Hornets, so they had to find a new name. But I think that you can kind of put a pin in it and say, all right, who's like all their like grandfathered in fans? Like, who are the Bobcats? Like, who is this team? They have no personality. It's super generic. Like, Bobcats is like one of the most generic team names ever. Has no personality. Then I remember when we were in high school and they changed the name back to the Hornets. I was like, this is cool, this is good, and they never really did anything with it. And my last point on them, LaMelo Ball and their current iteration, I'm not a big fan of it. I really like Con Knipple. I think he could be a legitimate franchise player. Reminds me a lot of Detlef Schrempf. I can't really pronounce it. They got to get rid of LaMelo Ball. He's not a winning basketball player. He's an influencer masquerading as a basketball player. Super talented, but, that's about it. So they picked him to sell jerseys. Hey, let's win. If you want Charlotte to be legitimate, go win. Make the playoffs. You can do that with some of these young guys they have now. So I'm going to pick up where Logan kind of left off here on the other kind of alternate universe of the Charlotte Hornets, and that is the New Orleans Pelicans, formerly the New Orleans Hornets, who can really be summarized by 3 drafts. So I'm going to kind of present this through that. They've had 3 different eras of New Orleans Hornets basketball / Pelicans basketball. The 2019 era, which we are currently in and probably going to, change the chapter here very soon because it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to really win anything. They're kind of fizzling out here. And that's the Zion Williamson era. So 2019, Zion Williamson. 2012, Anthony Davis, right after one of the most tumultuous trade debacles in NBA history. They draft Anthony Davis because they were changing over the old guard of, Chris Paul. And I brought up Chris Paul because in 2005, they drafted Chris Paul, who was the New Orleans Hornets' first ever franchise player. Now, you could argue David West, but let's be real. Chris Paul is an all-time player. David West was a great player, but he wasn't Hall of Fame level, and he certainly didn't have the impact on the NBA that Chris Paul did. So when the Charlotte Hornets left, there was this they left for New Orleans. There's this vacuum of basketball in Charlotte. Obviously, they pick up the Bobcats. The New Orleans Hornets were kind of a fun, interesting team. They had some decent players, and they weren't ever super irrelevant or anything like that. But they weren't ever super good. They had a winning season right off the bat. They won 47 wins in 2002, 2003. They were 500 in 03, 04, and then they were just wholly bad in 04, 05, which is why they were in position to draft Chris Paul, who's a transformative point guard. Something interesting is that in 05, 06, because of Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans played their basketball in Oklahoma City, so they were called the OKC Hornets / New Orleans Hornets. And a fun little NBA history tidbit is that, or they actually did that for 2 seasons, 05, 06 and 06, 07. Those 2 seasons in Oklahoma City kind of set the table for Seattle ownership to look at Oklahoma City as a legitimate spot where basketball could work because they had the arena and the fans came out. Now, Oklahoma City is the best team in the NBA, and they're an incredible franchise. They have fans that are more reminiscent of college fans. But would we have the Oklahoma City Thunder without the OKC Hornets? I don't know. That's an open-ended, we can debate that, but I think it's very interesting. Coming off those 2 seasons, they have Chris Paul, and they have the best season in franchise history, 2007, 2008, 56 and 26. I was kind of talking about the 2K, throwback teams, and I haven't played 2K in a long time, although if they are or aren't on it, this is kind of one of those teams, was that Hornets team, who was very, very good. They won their division, the only time in franchise history they won the division, and they had a team centered around Chris Paul. So I'm going to read this 2008 Hornets team. Chris Paul, these are the main players, by the way. Chris Paul, David West, Tyson Chandler, Peja Stojakovic, Mo Pete. Those are the starters. Chris Paul ends up winning the MVP, or excuse me, losing the MVP to Kobe Bryant, who went out and averaged an insane amount of he had a great season. Bill Simmons argues that Chris Paul, in hindsight, probably should have won that MVP. Kobe didn't win in 2006 when he averaged over 30 points a game. Steve Nash won. Chris Paul had his best season of his career. Obviously, the Lakers end up winning the championship, losing the championship in 2008 to the Boston Celtics. But he had a great season. He wins the '08 MVP. Chris Paul does not. Fine. But after that, the team was really never, they were never as good. They started to decline. 49 wins in '08-'09. And at this point in time, they're kind of running into some financial troubles. So over the next couple seasons, they're not, they just start to decline. They had 37 wins in 2010. And Chris Paul is unhappy, and their ownership is kind of up in the air. And what happens is 2010 owner George Shen, who Logan was talking about earlier, the financial situation was unstable, and he could not cover the operational costs to run the NBA team. That damaged his reputation, and it also limited outside buyers and potential partners. So what happened was the NBA bought the team. The NBA owned the team, and then when they went to trade Chris Paul, they traded him or agreed to a trade with the Los Angeles Lakers, who were very good at the time, and they were looking to extend Kobe Bryant's career. So this trade was a 3-team trade. Chris Paul from the Hornets to the Lakers. The Hornets got Lamar Odom from the Lakers, and then the Rockets were also in there. So Kevin Martin would have been sent to the Hornets. Power forward Luis Scola from Argentina, he would have got sent to the Hornets from the Rockets. And then young Goran Dragic, who was an all-star later in his career, would have got sent to the Hornets from the Rockets. So in hindsight, Lamar, he started to fizzle out. Kevin Martin was like a decent shooting guard. He could have been a starter there. Luis Scola, more of a role player. And then Dragic. So interesting, but those guys don't materialize to get Chris Paul. And then the Rockets would have gotten Pau Gasol from the Lakers. But people argued at the time that this trade was too loaded in favor of the Los Angeles Lakers. So the NBA did something unprecedented and vetoed the trade. They vetoed the trade. Chris Paul ends up going to the Clippers, the other Los Angeles team, the little brother team, and he ends up reviving the Clippers. They are one of the worst franchises in NBA history. They became more competitive than the Lakers with Dunk City, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin. They had a run there. They never won anything, but they were good, and they were always competitive. They were always in the mix. And the NBA, guys like Mark Cuban, who was the owner of the Dallas Mavericks at the time, lobbied David Stern like, hey, this is unfair. You gotta strike this down. A lot of the owners didn't agree with it, and they thought the Lakers got too much value. Unprecedented situation, so the NBA vetoes the trade, and the NBA also owns the team at that point in time. A little bit of, conspiracy stuff there. Did they want to preserve the value of the Hornets so they could sell the team down the road? Well, they eventually, after they got rid of Chris Paul, they did sell the team to Tom Benson, who is the owner of the New Orleans Saints. Here we are. By the way, they also draft Anthony Davis in 2012, who was coming off a championship at the University of Kentucky. He was National College Player of the Year. He's a transcendent college basketball player, transcendent high school player. He was the guy the Hornets were going to lean on into the future to run the franchise. Well, Anthony Davis technically only played one season for the Hornets because they changed their name to the New Orleans Pelicans. Horrifying logo. I like the name. Doesn't have a lot of aura, but Tom Benson, the owner of the Saints and now the Pelicans, wanted the team name to resemble the New Orleans area more so. And he thought the Pelicans would be the best way to do that. And throughout the Anthony Davis era, he had some good seasons for them. He became one of the best big men in the league, but they were never that great. Honestly, I think their best season they had, let me check here. Their best season they had around 45 wins. The Western Conference was pretty competitive. They had 48 wins in 17-18. Anthony Davis, just like Chris Paul, when it came time at the end of the road, asked for a trade. They traded him this time they traded him to the Los Angeles Lakers. Pelicans were, we got to restart again. And so they did. And they got Zion Williamson, who was a transcendent college player from Duke in the 2019 draft. So they've had three legit, and obviously, Zion, great player when he's healthy. He loves gumbo. Probably the worst place he could have been drafted, honestly, because he's had weight problems. He's already a big guy. And there really hasn't been anything relevant come out of the Zion Williamson Pelicans era besides people making memes about him online, about him being too big and him getting hurt and being inconsistent. And then when he does play, it's like, oh my God, I see it. This guy is incredibly good, but he hardly ever plays any consistent amount of basketball to string together wins for the Pelicans. Hard to build a team around a guy like that. But the Pelicans have had three transcendent NBA talents, all got through the draft. Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, Zion Williamson. And each of these eras, because I think we both agree that the Zion era is about to be over in New Orleans. They're either going to trade him or there's going to be some sort of ultimatum. They haven't won anything. They made the play-in game. The Pelicans weren't even that bad in 2023. 2024, they had 49 wins. They just couldn't really get over the hump. Couldn't get over the hump. So, with that being said, the history of this franchise is one of either, irrelevancy or failing to build around their star player, which they've had. And I'll take the Zion piece of this, that Zion era. They've had good players, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. They just haven't been able to, he hasn't been healthy enough for them to be good on a very legitimate basis. And when you have a star player like that missing a certain amount of time, you can't rely on him. You have to elevate certain other guys. They've drafted pretty well. They've got guys like Herb Jones. This season, the bottom is falling out, and they're terrible. And one thing about the Pelicans is just I don't really know where they go from here because their arena is getting a little old, and there's been murmurs that after Zion or whatever, that they could get sold. They are a prime candidate for relocation. Seattle, Las Vegas, these are just a few places where people are starting to talk a little bit. New Orleans is a football town. They are a Saints town. Now, the Saints haven't been that great recently, but they do have a Super Bowl. And if I know anything about New Orleans, it's they love LSU and they love the Saints. Those are the two teams. In the NBA, it's kind of just a sideshow. Tom Benson, the owner of the Pelicans, who bought the team in 2012, passed away in 2018. His wife, Gail Benson, took over operations of the entire franchise. But there's been criticism that Gail really only cares about the Saints, and I don't think that's incorrect. Now, there's a guy I've met here who's friends with my girlfriend and I, who's from Mississippi. We hang out with him on occasion, and he's a New Orleans Pelicans fan. That's his team. He follows the team, and he told me he wonders if Gail Benson actually even knows that she owns the New Orleans Pelicans, which is so funny because from what it sounded like talking to him, he watches all the games or tries to watch as many of the games as he can, which is insane to me. You couldn't, watching Pelicans basketball on a regular basis. I mean, I watch Reds baseball, but that's just so funny to me because it seems like she's not putting in the effort because she's more focused on the Saints or her own life. There's going to be some type of ownership change, I think, going forward. Why would you, if you're her, you could just own the Saints and sell the Pelicans and get billions? And does the NBA even really want a team in New Orleans anymore? Because it's not a great fan base. Like there are fans, but it's not a basketball market. They could probably maximize revenue, fans showing up, et cetera, if they move the team somewhere else. So with all that being said, this team has just kind of been irrelevant and bad. They've had a few moments here. They were always kind of in the mix of like interesting talking points. Not really playoff success, but people discuss them because of the star players that they've had. But the times they get discussed the most are when they're trading away their franchise player. That's when they get the most media. And usually the talk around that after the player is traded is overall negative because of the situation that had been bubbling up underneath the surface while that player was there. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on the Hornets and the Pelicans. Two team names, one franchise that's been pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, each of our picks are connected. And the way I look at it, it's you have two sides of the same coin that end up with the same result. Where New Orleans has had the opportunities to draft these generational players, and they just could not put the pieces around or get some of the other, just get all the factors together to make a run. Whereas I feel like the Hornets have never had that generational player to put that together, but they would make solid teams to be mediocre. I do 100% agree with the location. That is a football region. They love their Tigers. They love their Saints. The Pelicans are a side attraction. It would not surprise me at all with, all of these, the moves, the markets that have been happening in other leagues. And we've been hearing about the Seattle market for years now, potentially getting a team back. And Las Vegas jumping back up in terms of interest in a team. And there's so many other teams that, whereas the NBA, let's say you have a stadium that has, let's say, 20,000 people in it. You don't have, you can put a stadium in Louisville, Kentucky. You can put a stadium in Norfolk, Virginia. There's a lot more options than people think for NBA franchises versus football franchises or some other sports. The Pelicans have been just like the Hornets. They are a side note. They are the filler team. When I say, think of a team in the NBA, those teams are never going to be the ones that pop up in your head first unless you live there or for some reason you're a fan of them. That's it. They are not pulling punches. They are two somewhat poverty franchises that don't know what winning is and probably won't for a long time, to be quite frank. They're one of those teams, both those franchises are ones that had to catch lightning in a bottle. Because they don't have the market, they don't have the money, and no matter the times that they have been good, so let's say when the Hornets have had those moments, the Bobcats have had those moments, like the Eastern Conference is loaded. And then when the Pelicans are trying to make a run, now the Western Conference is loaded. I feel like it's been a long time since the league has actually had solid. The East and the West are pretty equal. One of them is always a gauntlet, and the other one is like, oh, here's three really good teams that could probably go to the NBA Finals, and then here's the West, which is like 7 teams that are going to, would beat the hell out of each other. And if you took the 6th seed in the West, they'd be the 3 seed in the East or something like that. We've had that ever since we've been alive. So it's tough for a smaller market team like that. And I really like the point that you made about, and I completely forgot about this, that when Hurricane Katrina came in and they did play in Oklahoma, that I guarantee you, nobody had thought about it, Oklahoma City as a market for basketball. But it worked. And you're right. The the Thunder are one of the best franchises in the modern NBA. Their fan base, the team talent, the way that they've been ran as a small market team is a prime example of how to do things right. They've that's you have two opposite ends of the spectrums: the Hornets and the Pelicans, and then the Thunder. If you're going to be a small market team where maybe you don't have the cash or you don't want to go into luxuries, that's how you do it. It was rough for some time periods, but they at least when they went down the hill and they're near the bottom, they can come back up and they're back at the top again. These two other teams have been close to the bottom, have been at the bottom, but they have not had the momentum to even come back up to even be a threat in their conferences.
Yeah, and if you want to be a good small market team, and this is going to be the most Captain Obvious statement of all time, is you have to have competent GMs, you have to have competent ownership that is committed to winning. You have less room for error because of your financial constrictions, hypothetically. So the Thunder, whose GM has been Sam Presti, have drafted well. They've made smart trades. They have great player development. They've hired the right coaches, and they've been relevant the entire time we've been essentially paying attention to basketball. Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Shea, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, all these guys. They have, honestly, it's a little surprising they only have one championship, but they've always been relevant, and they've been in the West the entire time, which is more competitive than the Eastern Conference. I want to circle back a little bit about relocation potential because I went to Seattle a couple years ago, and the reason that Seattle left the Thunder left Seattle for being the Sonics is because their arena, the key arena out there, was falling into disrepair. It was very old. They hadn't done any significant amount of renovation. So the team leaves, goes to Oklahoma City. The city can't really figure out what to do with the arena. When I went out there a couple years ago, their arena is fully revamped. They didn't build a new one. It's called Climate Pledge Arena, and it is nice. That's the home of the NHL team, the Seattle Kraken. If you go up in the Space Needle, which I did, you can look down on the arena, and it's super unique architecture. It looks really, really cool. And to me, I see that. I'm like, I could totally see an NBA team moving here. Why? There's a ready-made arena there for them. I mean, they could move into a state-of-the-art venue if they really wanted to. So that's always an option. And Las Vegas also has T-Mobile Arena. And those are the two markets that people keep talking about. Now, we hear expansion, 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 but Adam Silver's kind of pushed back on that recently. But that doesn't mean that they can't upgrade the lower rung of their franchises by allowing an ownership group to move cities. Because the other team you hear is Memphis. And, we're talking about all the, there's going to be some moving parts. And because of the way the Hornets have been run, or excuse me, the Pelicans, they haven't ingratiated themselves into that market. So if they left, people would just kind of be like, I feel like, as long as the Saints don't leave, we're good. We're totally fine. In the NFL is king down there, and college football, and the NBA, it kind of just seemed like, hey, when the Hornets moved, there was an arena available. We moved down there. And the other thing is, who's to say, I don't, knock on wood. I'm not predicting anything, obviously, but, there is potential for another natural disaster. Would the NBA have to get up and move again to another city? Would they play in Louisville for a couple of years if that happened? So I think if the NBA can avoid that situation altogether, or the ownership, they would probably be willing to do that. It's just really interesting about this team because for all the talent they've had and all the star players they've had, you never see anyone wearing a Pelicans jersey. You never see anybody wearing a hat, not even casually. You don't go to frat parties and see people wearing a Pelicans jersey, really. Maybe you saw Zion here and there, but they're not really part of the zeitgeist. And it's almost better to be a team like the Clippers who, and I know the Clippers have had a better history recently, but they they're like a punching bag. Like people knew who that was because they were so bad. They were like a punching bag. So it almost brought their like notoriety higher than a team like the Pelicans or the Hornets or whatever because they're just an afterthought. Nobody cares at all. So it's to me is it like because they're irrelevant almost that's even worse than just being really really bad. They're bad and irrelevant, but nobody cares.
Yeah, I think what the Clippers benefit from, which a lot of teams don't, is when you have two teams in the same city, which does not happen a lot. You know, if I think of the NFL with the Rams and the Chargers, they could care less like the interactions with each other. They could not. But you're right, the Clippers and the Lakers have this big brother little brother syndrome, and that naturally brings attention to the Clippers, not just because they're in LA, but people and instinctively I can say this in the college basketball world. We're both from Kentucky, Louisville and UK. Little brother big brother syndrome right there. People naturally get drawn into each side just because of what's going on around them in their environment. And the Clippers and the Lakers have that environment there. And to be quite frank, the Clippers, the most, like you had mentioned, most notable era that they've had was with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan and Chris Paul when, they are playing some high flying, dunking basketball. That's what, when you think of the Clippers, that's what I think of in terms of, how they're playing and whatnot. And then they've had the market because it's LA and they've had the Lakers there too. You're right. They've had at least the punching bag kind of tag hanging over the little brother. New Orleans doesn't have that. No, and you're right. Like, I don't think I've ever seen somebody wearing a Pelicans jersey in my entire life besides someone on TV or something like that. And if I did, I'd probably be a little disgusted, to be honest with you. I can at least understand the Hornets one because I'm like, oh, those are some cool colors. I got it just because I'm around. I have a Larry Johnson jersey. It's like, all right, cool logo back, whatnot. But I'm like, the Pelicans. You're right. It's no aura whatsoever. It was when they made the change from the Hornets, which I'm glad they did for Charlotte's sake. But I'm like, is there ever been a bigger downgrade in logo, name, everything? At least in modern era sports, I can't think of one. I really can't.
All right. So the last thing I'll say on this is that I totally agree. Although I don't hate the Pelicans name, but I remember their logo and stuff is all trash. It's all trash, and it's been the same. I think for pretty much the entirety of the primaries have been the same for the entirety of the duration they've been called that. And I remember in high school when they changed their name, I'm like like I thought it was fine. I like it could work. I mean, people like shorthand call them the Pels, but it's also like it's just so random. Like a sport, like what's intimidating about the Pelicans? Like it's so random. And I always thought that. So they tried to get a little too cute with it, maybe. And who wants to walk around with like the word Pelicans on the front of their jersey? Like it's just ugly. Nobody's doing that. No aura. So anyway, let's get to the last aspect of this list because I'll tee you up here. I kind of like this team, but yes, they are irrelevant. And football is king. And who's the king of the losers or
In
the
my
most irrelevant franchise in NFL history? Like, let's hear it.
in my opinion, and this is controversial because when you think of awful football teams, what's the worst franchise of all time in NFL? Maybe it's the Cleveland Browns. Maybe it's Detroit Lions. My nomination is the Arizona Cardinals. And I'll tell you why as I kind of go through the list. I'll go through the history, not as in depth as the Hornets, but they are the oldest continuously run professional football team in the United States, founded in 1898. They originally named the Morgan Athletic Club, and then in 1990 they decided to, 1901 they changed their name to the Racine Street Cardinals because they were based in Chicago. Their founder and original owner was Chris O'Brien. To put it in context, when this team was started, It was during the Spanish-American War. Okay? Nobody's alive to recall the Spanish-American War. They had played football in Chicago, just locally, from 1901 to 1921 in that region. There have been times where it had to be disbanded, that local league, because of World War I and the Spanish flu. Okay? They had joined the American Professional Football Association in 1920, which would later become the National Football League. In terms of all the teams who are a part of the APFA, only 2 of those teams would make it into the NFL and stay. That is the Chicago Bears and the Cardinals. In 1922, they changed their name, mostly because the Racine Street Cardinals, there is a team that was created in Racine, Wisconsin, so they became the Chicago Cardinals. In their early years, they had some success. 5 winning seasons between 1920 and 1932. They had no championships during that time. I should note that during this time, there was no championship games. It was just winning over overall record at the end of the season with how many they played. However, in this time in the league, there was no set schedule. If you wanted to have an expedition game with, this is the joke, but the blind and the deaf, you can, and count it up on the record tally. So it was very Wild West, loose organization base within the organization. In 1929, first change in ownership, Chris O'Brien had sold the team to a Chicago doctor, David Jones, for $25,000. It should be noted that during this year in 1929, which is impressive for the year, the Cardinals would play a player named Duke Slater, who would become the first black offensive lineman in league history. And he also played on the D-line, and he played for punt. So he was a 3-way player. In 1932, David Jones would sell the team due to its struggling performance during this time to Charles W. Bidwell. If that name sounds familiar, it's because the Bidwell family still owns the Cardinals today. So they have owned the team coming up on 100 years. Once we get to 2032, I hope we get to that point. But they sold it for $50,000. The playoffs officially began and championships started in 1933. They were very bad in the mid to late 30s and early 40s. Part of this was the league was struggling because, hey, when your roster numbers are limited because, a whole World War II broke out, the league is going to be hurting a little bit. During, I believe it was 1943, this would be the first time ever, at the time, Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chicago Cardinals would merge team rosters for one season so that they could play. They didn't win a single game that season. They are arguably one of the worst teams in terms of entire NFL history. I didn't pull the statistics for it, but it was not like, oh, you lost every game. Well, the Detroit Lions have done, teams have done that. I'm like, no, they were like losing by like 30-point averages. It was bad. However, in 1947, Charles Bidwell would pass away, and his wife would take over, Violet Bidwell. They would win their first NFL championship game that year against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they would return the year later in 48, and they would lose in the NFL championship to a rematch of the Eagles. So a little bit of old blood between those two franchises. And in that championship, it was actually the first NFL game to be televised. In the 50s was just terrible. They only had one winning season. At this point in 1959, the Bidwells were facing financial ruin, and they had petitioned to move the franchise out of Chicago, mostly because the Bears at this time were a much better team, more consistent, and at the time, Chicago, with football still being on the rise, could only support the one market. The NFL refused to relocate unless they were paid a percentage of the move. However, they were unwilling to sell out to different investors to get this money. They didn't want to give up control. So some potential investors that they refused to sell to were Lamar Hunt, Bud Adams, Bob Usum, Max Winter. Why are these names familiar? Well, they would be the ones to start the American Football League. So now you had two football leagues in America. And due to this new league presence, this external pressure, the NFL decided, they caved in. They're like, okay, we'll do the relocation. We'll get you to a bigger market. So they moved him to St. Louis. What's the problem with moving to St. Louis? It's a good market. They have a baseball team called the Cardinals. So they were called the St. Louis Football Cardinals. That is what they came up with. Could not change the name. They decided to keep it. A couple years later, after that move in 1962, Violet Bidwell would pass away, and her son Bill Bidwell would inherit the team. Once again, the 60s, not very good to the Cardinals. I'm not going to cover them in depth like I did with the Hornets coming in. 1970, the NFL and AFL merger occurred, and they created and established the NFC East, which is where the Cardinals would play in. So they finished the season in 1974 as 10-4. They would win the division. It would be the first time that they made the playoffs in 26 years. They would lose to the Vikings in that first game. In 1975, they would win the division in back-to-back years, but they would lose to the Rams once again in the playoffs, first game. And then in 1982, the last time that they would make the playoffs while in St. Louis, it was during a strike season. They would finish 5-4, just edging in, and lose in the wild card. Why did I say the last game in St. Louis? Well, another relocation occurred. A combination of continued loss of fan interest, ticket sales dropping, and an aging stadium. On March 18, 1988, the NFL had granted permission for the organization to move to Tempe, Arizona, and they would rename their team the Phoenix Cardinals. They're still working on it. They're trying. In 1988, 7-9 missed the playoffs. Between 89 and 92, they would finish either 5-11 or 4-12 each season. Finally, in 1994, they were like, we should change it to the Arizona Cardinals to represent the state. I'm like, that's a genius move. Good job, guys. It only took you almost 7 years to do it, but you did it. You figured it out. At this time, this is when I'm going to dive a little bit more into the coaches because this is a little bit more relevant. They would hire Buddy Ryan as a head coach and a GM, NFL legend. If you know anything about that, it never works to have your head coach be the GM at the same time. Doesn't work. They would finish 8-8 that season, miss the playoffs. 95, they would finish 4-12, and then they would fire Buddy Ryan after the season. Look at that. 96, they would hire Vince Tobin. They go 7-9. They did have a defensive rookie of the year in Simeon Rice. 97 was awful, 4-12. In 98, 9-7 record. They would have their first playoff game win against the Cowboys in the Super Bowl era. So keep in mind that I told you that they went to the playoffs in like the 40s. Okay? They had not been back, I should say, earlier than that. Let me rephrase that. They had made it to the playoffs in the 70s. They had not basically get their first playoff win in the Super Bowl era until 98. Okay, they've had their chances. They would beat the Cowboys, and then they would lose in the divisional playoffs against the Vikings. 99, 6-10. 2000, 3-13. They would fire Vince Tobin during the 2000 season and hire Dave McGinnis. 2001, 7-9. 2002, 5-11. 2003, 4-12. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Anquan Bolden. 2004, they would fire Dave McGinnis and hiring Dennis Green. We are who they thought they were, Green. Best, top 5 in terms of speeches. If you do not know what I'm talking about, look up Dennis Green. It'll be the first thing that pops up. They finished 6-10 that season. 2005, 5-11. 2006, 5-11. 2007, 8-8. Missed the playoffs. They would fire Dennis Green and hire head coach Ken Wisenhunt. That name, if it means anything to you, it is terrible for me because he's involved with my Tennessee Titans. I do not like that man. However, I will give him kudos. He went 9-7 in his first year as head coach. This is the run, the big one. This is what everybody thinks of when you think of Arizona Cardinals. Wild card win against the Falcons. Division win against the Panthers. NFC Conference Championship against the Eagles. They would lose Super Bowl 43 to the Steelers with the legendary catch on the sideline and the James Harrison return for the longest interception, pick 6 in a Super Bowl. Very notable player during this time, and I'm only going to name a couple. Do not get mad at me. I'll get to it, but definitely Kurt Warner, Larry Fitzgerald, 2009, 10-6 record, won the wild card game with the Packers, lost the divisional game with the Saints. 2010, 5-11, their quarterback Kurt Warner would retire. 11, 8-8, 12, 2012, 5-11, 2013, where they would fire Ken Wisenhunt and they would hire arguably their best coach of all time in Bruce Arians. 10-6 record. 14, 11-5, lost in the wild card of the Panthers. This was Cam Newton Panthers, who looked unstoppable at that time. So I don't hate on him too much for that. Bruce Arians was coach of the year. 15, this is the best record they would ever have in franchise history. It would be 13-3. They would win the divisional playoff game against the Packers, and they would lose in the NFC Conference to the Panthers again. This was the Carson Palmer year, where it looked like he was having a revival. He was having a late career revival, and I believe they lost like 48-15 or something like that. They got stomped. Not a good game. In 2016, 7-8-1. 2017, 8-8. At this point, Bruce Arians would retire at the end of the season as head coach. 2018, they used the scapegoat of Steve Wilkes, who finished 3-13 and fired him at the end of the year. 2019, the quote-unquote model of Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive genius, would come in. 5-10 record. And we talked about him in a previous pod episode, him taking Kyler Murray first overall despite having Josh Rosen in the previous draft. Kyler Murray would go on to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. In 2019, the death of Bill Bidwell would occur, and his son, Michael Bidwell, who is the current owner, is still running the place. 2020, 8-8. 2011, 11-6. They lost in the wild card game to the Rams. 2022, 4-13. 2023, they fire Cliff Kingsbury, hire the robot Jonathan Gannon as head coach. Finished 4-13. 2024, 5-9. This season, not going too well. I'm going to take my breath. So, in summary for this franchise, in the past 60 years, they have only won 6 playoff games. 3 of those were from one season. Okay. As of right now, they have the longest championship drought in all U.S. Big Four sports. When I say drought, I'm talking about they have won a championship at some point and they have not returned. So, yes, the Tennessee Titans have never won a championship, but they're not on a drought because they've never even sipped the water. That being said, some teams that might pop up, you're like, well, what about the Detroit Lions? What about Cleveland Browns? They've been awful. Yeah, overall they have been. But each one of those teams have won, I believe, at least 3 or 4 championships before the Super Bowl. Arizona only has 1 to claim for them being the oldest team in NFL history. They've only made the playoffs 11 times in their over 100 years tenureship in the league. They've only won the division title 5 times. They've only had a winning record 31 years. Okay. Of the 371 members that are currently in the NFL Hall of Fame, only 6 of them have played for the modern Arizona Cardinals. In total, 24 if you go all the way back. I'm not about to list Hall of Famers from the 1940s. I apologize if somebody's upset by that. I'm not going to do it. So who are the 6 players that have played for the current day Arizona Cardinals? You're going to notice a trend. Alan Faneca, who was a 10-year Steeler, 2-year Jet, 1-year Arizona Cardinal. Dwight Freeney, 11-year Colt, 2-year Charger, 1-year Cardinal, 1-year Falcon, 1-year Detroit, Seattle. Edgar and James, 7 years of Colt, 3 years Arizona, Seattle 1 year. Emmitt Smith, Cowboys 13 years, Arizona 2 years. Kurt Warner, 6 years with the Rams, 1 year with the Giants, 5 years with Arizona. And the only player on this list who was actually drafted by the Cardinals is Ionis Williams, Arizona for 10 years, Rams for 4. One player that they've drafted since 1985 has been a Hall of Fame inductee. Now, I realize I'm leaving a lot of names off this list. There's future Hall of Famers out there. Larry Fitzgerald. Anquan Bolden is not making it, but he's one of those Hall of very good players. Fantastic. We'll see. I don't think he will, but we're talking about Patrick Peterson, Buda Baker, um, Dominique Rogers-Cromartie. I'm not arguing that these players should make it in. I'm just saying these are some notable players with the franchise. Jake Plummer, Darnell Dockett, Carson Palmer, Carlos Dansby, Otis Anderson, Roy Green, Lewis Sharp, Adrian Wilson, Freddie Joe Nunn, Calais Campbell, David Johnson had the couple of years where he popped out. Tyrann Mathieu, Pat Tillman, Antrell Roll. That, of course, if you list out a bunch of names like that with any team, they're like, oh, okay, you had some players. My point is, how does a franchise that has been around this long, the longest, have this sort of record? They're 600 wins, 822 losses, 41 ties. They have a 42% winning in any game. It mind blows me how you can have all of this information where it's like, I didn't want to pick, with the Hornets, I picked an expansion team. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to pick an historical team with the NFL. And this is the first team that came to mind because of their lack of success that I've just seen in my lifetime, and I knew during the 80s and the 90s and some in the 70s. I did not realize that going all the way back, which I knew they were the oldest team in the league, that they were also awful. Awful. This is an organization that has struggled for the longest time. Now, in terms of right now, more on the present, the Arizona Cardinals definitely the bottom five in about every league category in terms of ownership you can think of, in terms of value, in terms of let's just say the average number for a team to take their profits and kind of reinvest within the team is around 3, 4, 5, 6%. And I'm talking about brand, okay, imaging. You're trying to grow your market. The Arizona Cardinals are dead last in that. And if I wanted to compare, let's say the bottom 10 teams, I'm just going to throw out some in terms of market size. You've got like the Cincinnati Bengals. You've got Kansas City Chiefs is actually top 10 smallest market. You've got the Tennessee Titans. You got all these teams you can think of. I'm not going to go through this entire list off the top of my head. When you compare that Arizona Cardinals have almost double the population of everybody else on that list, and they spend in ratio the least amount of reinvesting back on their team to spread their brand, because quite frankly the Bidwell family we give a lot of crap to the Brown family with the Bengals. I'm sure it's the same exact story in Arizona, but at this point you only hear about it if you live in the state of Arizona, because of the storied franchises in their division and just the lack of energy, emotions from that state. I think it's just pure frustrations. Because what's been funny to me is when I've been doing the research and kind of looking up, I'm like, oh, this Charlotte Hornets video, the Bobcats video, it's got a lot of views. If you try to look up the franchise history into the Arizona Cardinals, it's almost like nobody gives a shit. And like nobody's even tried to, oh, somebody posted a video and it's like, oh, this is posted 3 years ago and it's got 2,000 views. It's like I'll sit there and I'll watch. I'm like, this is actually really good, like fairly good production value and whatnot on it. It's just nobody cares, because nobody cares about the Arizona Cardinals. The fact that you can be like, all right, think of one of the worst teams in the NFL. Your mind is never going to go to the Arizona Cardinals because they're a forgotten team. This is a team that has been somehow cursed to be mediocre forever. Not even mediocre, bad by the NFL gods forever. It's a team that you would think the NFL would potentially take more pride and show, hey, this is one of our founding members, the longest historical. They don't really go out and share that stuff. They don't go out and make a big thing about it. They don't make a big, the Bidwell family has been one of the longest running owners. They do not care. The NFL wants you to forget about the Arizona.
The biggest game slash event at State Farm Stadium in the past 5 years was the Charlie Kirk Memorial Service in the wake of his assassination. So the stadium that the Cardinals call home can't really, it's more, I feel like it's more known for hosting other events than the Cardinals. We have Final Fours there, Super Bowls there. What about a Cardinals regular season game? Obviously, people go to the games. I'm not saying that, but it's just interesting. And the other thing I wanted to say, and you talked about it earlier, the Arizona Cardinals, much like real life Arizona, are the retirement community of the NFL. When you're done and maybe you need to eke out another year for legacy stats or you need another contract and you can just quite play still, Arizona Cardinals, that's where you're going. You're going to play there. I remember the first time, this was right when I was getting into sports, like 2004, 2005, and at the school, Northern Elementary, like Scholastic Book Fair, they sold like Guinness books of world records for like kids or something. And there was like most rushing yards in the NFL. There was like a sports section, and under that was like most rushing yards in the NFL. Obviously, that answer is Emmitt Smith. And as a kid, what I thought was funny is the picture they used was Emmitt Smith wearing an Arizona Cardinals jersey. And I'll never forget that. It still sticks out in my mind today. I will say this too. When Arizona went to the Super Bowl, I was rooting so hard for them. It was probably the team I was rooting for the most, that outside of like my own team when the Colts went to the Super Bowl in 2006. I was on the Cardinals. I really wanted them to win. That whole game I was up, like stoked for them. Obviously, they ended up losing to the Steelers in what would become one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. Santonio Holmes catch, James Harrison run down, Larry Fitzgerald touchdown. Like just so many good moments from that game. And they never really have reached. They caught lightning in a bottle. They were 9-7 wild card team. They were actually better the next year, but didn't win a playoff game. And that's really the summary of the Cardinals. Besides a very, very, very few small, years, they haven't been great at all. They don't really have a lot to point to. The Carson Palmer year is one of those like hipster football years. Like, do you remember the 2015 Arizona Cardinals? They went 13-3. I think that was their best regular season win total of all time. And that was a really good team, and they never ended up really doing anything. So, in short, for a team that's that old and that historic, that has moved cities multiple times, they've never found any sort of traction or even relevancy within their markets. They were second fiddle to the Chicago Bears. They were second fiddle to the St. Louis Cardinals. They're the primary team out in Arizona, but Arizona is kind of like Florida. It's like a little bit of a, hey, this is something to do, but it's not like the thing to do. Especially when you're not that great, you can just not care. You should just not care. And they're not from Arizona or Phoenix originally, so there's not like generations of fans, coming in. The other thing I will say, kind of mentioning like relevant like Cardinals moments and how the Cardinals are part of the zeitgeist. You could make a sincere argument that the most famous Cardinals player, maybe ever, is the late Pat Tillman. I mean, genuinely. And so I just want to throw that out there, that's kind of not that Pat Tillman is not, famous or relevant or important, but the most famous Arizona Cardinal in history, arguably, is known for more outside of football, for military service, rather than he was a good football player, but rather than his, on field, legacy as an Arizona Cardinal.
Yeah, that's a really good point with Pat Tillman. In terms of like the icon for a team, it probably is him. But you're right. It's not because of his ability with football is because of what occurred during his military service, and the NFL has always kind of honored that, and it is a very unique story if you have not looked into that. Um, to bounce back to one of my points that I did not make. So in terms of when I've said like the ownership and they are one of the lowest valued teams in the NFL, is it the market itself? Well, let's look at the Phoenix Suns, the NBA team that's in the same city there. They are like mid pack. I think when I was doing this research, they were like in terms of value or income, they were like the 13th or 14th league in the NBA. The team, so they're profitable, and people show up and show out for the Suns. They do not show up and show out for the Cardinals. I'm not saying nobody does. The Cardinals obviously have a fan base in that area. However, I think that's an indicator of ownership, which they started to do in the past 10 years, where they're kind of like, oh, the players will take this anonymous survey and they will rank their own teams and da da da. I don't think I've ever seen Arizona higher than like 27th, 28th on that list. And there's been times that they finished as the last team. They're notable. They are, I believe, the only team in the NFL that makes their payers pay for their food at the facility. It's not just, not
Actually,
being like,
think
oh,
the
they got to
Bengals might be on that list too, but I'm not sure. Don't.
I thought the Bengals changed it. I
Maybe they
thought the
did. Maybe
Bengals
they
changed
did.
it. Uh, but they were known for that, and it's just this is a team. This is what happens when you have. And I'm not saying I don't want a small mark or like a family-owned team, but they don't have the money. They don't have the revenue to, let's say, maybe make the upgrades that they want to, or let's just say they have no interest in it because they have a stockpile that they want to keep up. I don't blame them for it, but this is when it's like, oh yeah, how can teams like the Arizona Cardinals or the Cincinnati Bengals compete? Let's say against like Denver, who's owned by one of the richest companies in the world, with the Walton family. Um, Even though the NFL is probably the most balanced in terms of salary cap and whatnot, you have the little stuff that's like, oh, yeah, everybody gets the revenue from the team, but it's like, oh, I got some extra money on the side. Let me upgrade this, or let me give you some more guaranteed money on this contract, or let me make this experience better. And those little things add up to incentivize players, free agents to come over. Now, obviously, Arizona doesn't have that problem. They're just bringing guys out who are at the end of their career. And not that they've been bad, coming over. These are phenomenal players that they've brought over. But there's been it is a team that they have to do everything right to get that lightning in a bottle. This is not a team that can afford to make mistakes, and this is an organization that has had various mistakes along the way. Let's just say modern, since '85, since they came to Arizona. They haven't been perfect, and it's tough to be perfect, and there's so many times now where let's just say Kansas City Chiefs, I'm making the comparison to them. It's like they went on their dynastic run, and now we're questioning whether that's over or not because of how they've drafted the past few years and how they've spent money on some of their players now. It's tough for championship levels teams, let alone a small market team where the options of what you can do is even more limited financially. So that is my nomination in terms of the NFL pool. It's got to be Arizona for me because of just the historical standings and the lack of success throughout time.
And to put a bow on this segment, it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, but you were talking about franchises being undervalued within their like market capacity. We started off this list with the Miami Marlins, who you would think because baseball culture and the connection to Latin America, everything that's kind of baked in there, that there would be more, their franchise would be worth more because of that market. But they're one of the least valuable teams, they are the lowest valued team in the NFL or MLB according to Forbes. Similarly, the Arizona Cardinals, not that it's not quite 1-1 because of the whole like culture out there in Arizona. Like they do have good sports fans, but it's not like it's a lot of older people, et cetera, et cetera. They're one of the five least valuable teams in the NFL. Still an accomplishment. You're still worth over $4 billion, but because the Suns and everything, there's more. There's more room for that to grow, but they've been historically incompetent, and so they're not worth as much as they could be. The asset is arguably underperforming. So, anyway, let's move on to our next segment, which is just going to be shooting the shit about football because we've had a few things kind of bubble up over the past week. It's been a big, strange football story week. We've had guys come out of retirement who have been retired for 5 years. We've got coaches being fired for their off the field conduct. We have quarterbacks in press conferences talking about how unhappy they are, giving us flashbacks of another great quarterback who held that information in and then kind of unleashed it on the world. So let's start there with the Cincinnati Bengals because earlier in the week, Joe Burrow discussed his unhappiness with maybe football and how, kind of alluding to how things have been going recently. Obviously, at the height of Joe Burrow's Bengals tenure, they made the Super Bowl. They went to the AFC Championship game and narrowly lost to the Chiefs. So the heights have been substantial, but the lows have been substantial too. Being injured and out for the whole season or missing the entire season or getting a nagging turf toe injury and coming back, winning a close game, and then losing to the Bills largely on the shoulders of his interceptions, that's not great mentally. And people online are taking this and running with it. They're comparing him to Andrew Luck. That comparison's been made here on this podcast before. We all kind of understand the analogy. And it's interesting because I'm of two minds before I let you speak on it. So, one, I think Joe Burrow at this point is rational as an employee of an organization. He is being paid a lot of money, but I'm not of this like old head kind of mindset where he can't voice his displeasure with being hurt or the team underperforming, or maybe they haven't done enough to put pieces around him in order for the team to succeed like they had prior. I think he's allowed to do that. I think it's fine. Their team is more or less out of the picture of the playoffs this season. So why not? I think everybody in the Bengals organization is displeased with how this season has gone. It's not his fault he's gotten injured, even if there's a caveat for his play style that I always like to bring up. And he self-admitted that on the Full Send podcast some years ago. It's a very ugly situation that could be brewing underneath the surface. I don't think Joe Burrow is like a rock the boat guy. Like, I don't mean it's ugly in the sense that he's, going throughout the organization and throwing the owners or the executives under the bus or any teammates or anything like that. But I think it's ugly in the sense that we all understand the displeasure because we've watched this team for so many years, and we so viscerally see the misses that happen through the draft, through free agency, or people getting hurt at inopportune times, with that being Joe Burrow himself. And so you could see the displeasure, and I think a lot of expectations were put on this season, and for him to get hurt in week 2 with a nagging injury, one that probably hurt really bad, it sucks for him, and the season was essentially a wash, just like last year. So there's been 2 straight seasons that have been essentially a wash for the Bengals. not living up to expectations. Now, I'm of another mind that I do think the caveat matters, his play style and getting him hurt and taking too many sacks. And it's not all the offensive line's fault or the play calling, the play caller's fault. Some of that's on the quarterback. And I also want to say that I'm a little frustrated with the kind of the all of this because I believe Joe Burrow gets treated with kid gloves in the media. I think people are so quick to wrap their arms around Joe Burrow. Not to say like he deserves a bunch of criticism, but I think he gets shielded from a lot of criticism. And I think some of it is legitimate. And I don't want to see not that like your quarterback like can't do stuff off the field and he can't like enjoy Pokemon cards or going to these parties, but also like and he played great last season. But you look at his stats and at the end of the year, they were great and he won them a lot of games. But guess what, folks? I watched pretty much all the Bengals games. He lost them a lot of games too. And he had a great season and he still, is part of the reason why they lost some of those games. Now, you could argue they wouldn't even be in those games without him, and that's totally factually true. Understood. They shouldn't expect fans or the organization shouldn't expect Joe Burrow to be perfect every single time, but, facts are facts. Some of those games, he didn't play well enough. They lost. They lost to the New England Patriots in week 1. I harped on that on Twitter and forever and ever and ever. You cannot, as Joe Burrow, lose to New England Patriots. He played bad during that game. They missed the playoffs barely last year. Patriots loss rears its ugly head. We all understand this. But, when it's time, when the rubber hits the road and they're not very good and he's had these ups and downs with these injury recoveries and he comes back and he doesn't play amazing against the Bills with those 2 interceptions that essentially lost them the game in a game they had to win to be in playoff contention. And we sat here on this podcast and kind of cast it out that we thought it could happen. A lot would have to fall into place. We conceded it also may not happen, but they could have made the playoffs if, they went on this kind of run. The schedule was favorable to them at the end of the year. But with all that being said, I don't want to hear, man, about your aura farming and, your Pokemon cards and the fossils and like, I want to see, it's been a couple years and I always bring this up and Bengals fans are fixated on 2021 still. And they have an emotional attachment to Joe Burrow and I totally understand that. And he's the man here. He's like the LeBron here. But local media could be a little more, I don't want him to start asking him a bunch of like insane questions and then he's like, well, I'm out of here. Not that he can do that. He signed a contract, but like force a trade or something. But I think the national and local media needs to be a little more critical of Joe Burrow. And the franchise deserves all the criticism in the world. It's not all on the franchise, guys. It's not. Okay. Carson Palmer wasn't perfect here either. You can be snake bitten by that. Whatever. It's not all on the franchise. But it's also not up to the star player to, make the franchise, whitewash it over. I just think it's a frustrating situation. I'm not surprised he feels that way. And the last thing I'll say, Logan, is I do think there's some kind of ultimatum coming in the offseason. I don't think Joe Burrow is the kind of guy to ask for a trade like that, force his way out and rip the floor from underneath, rip the rug from out underneath the fan base. But I do think there's going to be this offseason, he's going to go to the ownership, he's going to sit down and say, look, I need X, Y, and Z. There needs to be something done. We need a certain amount of investment. If not, trade me and I will hold out. And there's going to be an ultimatum issued. I think more than likely we see Joe Burrow suiting up for the Cincinnati Bengals next season. They have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins under contract. I think it would be foolish for him to do that, considering the heights they had reached in the past. They have a lot of money available to be spent in the offseason. They have some bad players who are, their contracts are up. But I do think an ultimatum is coming.
I do too. And he sent that out. That was purposeful. That was calculated. That was not something that was just based on pure emotion in the moment, because that's not Joe Burrow. He's never been like that. He sent it as a message. It's not as far as for him to actually think about retiring or whatnot. I just think that was just a general message like, I am not happy with this situation right now. And I think before I do agree with the give me XYZ, I think this could be potential. Well, I mean, we'll have to see. I'm just guessing here. I'm just throwing out theories. But we'll have to see what they do with their coaching staff. I think that's a big one where the fans are, when they got their pitchfork and torches out right now. Zach Taylor is probably the first one on the block that I'm thinking of. Now, in terms of operations, like Duke Tobin and some of those, listen, Bengals got a funky situation set up with that. I have no clue how that's going to turn out. Who knows what relationship is there between Brown and like Duke Tobin and some of those other people. I do think because of the success that Burrow has had in Cincinnati and the overall historical lack of success with that franchise and the Super Bowl, he's the darling. He's the LeBron, I agree, in Cincinnati. And more people are willing to throw their torches on different piles than put it on his. It's not going to happen. They're going to want Zach Taylor out. They're going to want Duke Tobin out. They're going to want other personnel people out. They're going to sit there and say, oh, they can't draft offensive line. They can't keep one healthy. They're let the defense go. And all of these things are true. Every single one of them is true. Joe Burrow does play a part of it because of his play. We've talked about it before. But he has to do a better job protecting himself, get the ball out quicker. He's already on pace. We've talked about it before, him taking more sacks than Andrew Luck in less games. But it's frustrating because this is we were talking about all these franchises earlier. This is a small market team that has the lightning in the bottle, or it did have it, and we're watching it slowly fall apart. The sparks in the bottle are not there anymore. And this is me, and people are not going to like this because I'm a glass half empty person. The window's gone. I really honestly think that. It's gone. It's going to take too long to put it back together the way that the Bengals are ran. Nor do I think they should be doing this shotgun approach where we're like, all right, we're going to throw all this money, try to piece it all together. One man, we're going to do this for a year or two. Just put the best roster we can and say F the future. First off, the Bengals aren't going to do that. They never will. And that is not a good way to build cohesion in an NFL franchise. The window's closed, and I do think I've thought this for years, and now it's coming up to the front of it here. I'm like, I don't think Joe Burrow is going to retire, but I think eventually he's going to be like, enough is enough. I'm doing whatever it takes to eventually get out of here. I really do think it's going to come to that. I don't know when. I don't think it's going to be this offseason. Probably not the next. But it'll probably get to the point where he's coming up towards the end or later part of his contract when he's sitting there. He's like, man, I'm 29. I'm 30 years old. Potentially half of my career is done. Potentially. What have I got to show for it? I made it to one Super Bowl. Maybe, who knows what it looks like down the road. Maybe he's got a playoff win, whatever it is. But as of right now, he's like, besides the loss, I have nothing to show for it. I have been hurt at least a third of my career to this point. It's like I'm watching around the league. I'm seeing all these other teams and franchises build their quarterback correctly. Man, look at Justin Herbert. A lot of his guys are hurt right now, but man, they're really behind him, and that's not necessarily a huge money income franchise either in LA. It's like, oh, let's look at Green Bay. Man, they build it right. They do it right. They're publicly owned, quote unquote. You're seeing all these other teams that are doing it right and have the blueprint to do it. And I think eventually he's gonna have to make a decision at some point. And it wouldn't surprise me at all when he's like, all right, Carson Palmer 2.0, I'm out. Send me anywhere. I don't think it's happening soon, but his messaging with that, something's got to change. And if nothing changes, I think Bengals fans have every right to be upset as much as they want. I'm not saying go burn down the stadium, but how can you have multiple seasons like this where it's like, all right, we're just going to keep Zach Taylor. We're going to keep the same personnel up in the upper office there. You can't do it. Something has to change. The Bengals, who move at a snail's pace to make changes, has to make a change now. And if they can't do it, it's just a proof of how incompetent of an organization they are.
I think there's one more year. They got one more year here. Like in this kind of like he's unhappy now. I think he gives it one more year because of the Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They have to essentially rebuild their entire defense. They've missed on first round picks. They have Miles Murphy. They've tried to draft edge rushers that they haven't had it, very good luck. They've offensive line, they're still struggling. Not that they need to just continue to like Orlando Brown has regressed. They have young guys there. There's still some holes. Obviously, his play style attributes to it, but there's your two most important aspects of a football team besides quarterback, outside of quarterback, arguably, your defense and your offensive line are not very good. They would have to hit on a lot of players in this draft, which they are going to have a high pick, and I think Joe knows that, and they are going to have a good amount of money to spend in the offseason on defensive pieces. They have they have good running backs for the most part. They have veterans. They have good wide receivers. They have, tight ends like Gesicki willing to sign for, be part of that offense. They just need guys to improve on the defense. And I know I always like to give the take of like what really annoys me about the media coverage of him is more about the media fawning, the obsession. Not that I want him to just get like grilled all the time. I wish it's hard, man. Like I've never been a quarterback. Like if you're in the public eye like that, and you're not being able to play, and you're a super competitive person, and you want to be out there and competing. But you want to stay like relevant. I've never been in that headspace, but I do think he gets treated with kid gloves a little bit, and I think the fawning of him needs to be turned down a little bit. With that being said, I think it would be every bit justified to ask for a trade if the situation does not improve after next offseason. I really would not like to see him retire. I'm not a Bengals fan. It really sucked when Andrew Luck retired. Really, really sucked because Ryan Grigson did not draft very well. He did not invest in the offensive line. Peyton Manning never really had a lot of great defenses. He had some good defensive players. There were some years where they were better than most, but it's not like Peyton Manning was running out there on the field with a bunch of great defenses every year. They were not the Patriots. But what they did do was invest in offensive linemen to protect Peyton Manning. And Ryan Grigson with Andrew Luck did not do that. So the situation's coming to a head, and for the Bengals fans, I hope he does not ask for a trade or retire. I hope this can be smoothed over. I think the likely thing to do would be to fire Zach Taylor. I do think the Bengals could succeed if they had a better play caller for Joe Burrow, and there are plenty of good offensive coordinators out there for the Bengals to hire. There is proof of concept out there. I'll say this again. I've said it before. Zach Taylor has a losing record as the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's been there for like 7 years. So I know Mike Brown likes to commit to guys, and Zach has had some success, but I never thought they ever won because of Zach Taylor. It was always because of the offense or because of, willing themselves to win. Zach Taylor to me is not a great head coach. I think he's a good figurehead. I think he's a good, probably locker room guy, keeping guys, hyped up and happy. But I think he also could be probably a little bit of a pushover and a camp counselor type, as I've said before. So, anyway, to wrap that up, I'd like to see the Bengals. I'd like to see them do well in the offseason. I want this football team to be good. It's fun when this team is good. It's fun when the Bengals are competitive. I hate watching him get hurt. I wish he'd protect himself a little bit better, but ultimately, I think an ultimatum's coming this offseason, and the clock is starting to tick.
Yeah, it is. We'll just have to wait and see what happens next. And I would say in some other big news that happened this week that caught a lot of people off guard, not in the NFL world, but in the college world, is that Michigan has fired their head coach, Sharon Moore. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on what exactly happened. Still seems like we're getting details coming out. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you have heard about some of these details. So I'm not going to recover it. My thought process is, how bad is Michigan just panicking right now? Because all of a sudden, I'm not saying they had a wonderful season, but they had a good season considering how it was the previous season. Who's going to be the new head coach? You are late in your search to do it because a bunch of these spots have already been filled. Is Michigan to do something crazy bringing in somebody like LSU did? In terms of we're going to get the biggest name possible. We're going to get one of these guys from the other schools that are jumping in the playoff. One name I've heard a lot is DeBoer from Alabama, which is would you really do that? I'm because I think Michigan football can outpay Alabama football if that's really how they want to go. I don't think people realize, because, especially some people that are pro SEC, he would never. I'm for the right amount he would, and Michigan has that right amount.
I can speak on that a little later here, too.
But, maybe some other names. I've heard Kenny Dillingham, who's Arizona State's head coach. You could say, Jed Fish was previous Jim Harbaugh's quarterback's coach, and he's been rebuilding Arizona for the past few years. He's been pretty competent. Maybe one coach I'm interested in because is Kyle Whittingham with Utah. He stepped away from the program, and they just before that they announced this big financial agreement that they had made. And I'm wondering if potentially with that agreement, if Whittingham stepped out on that or something went wrong, and I don't know if we would. They've mentioned one of my football college sweethearts with Jeff Brom and the Louisville Cardinals. I don't know if Jeff Brom would walk, but hey, he just kind of got financially invested with Louisville, but enough money will make people jump. But I could go through the list. You could sit there and be, what about one of the coordinators for Ohio State? I'm I can't imagine Matt Patricia running Michigan like that. That'd be hilarious. But I've heard somebody say Brian Kelly. I don't think Brian Kelly's getting a job this year. I think he might have to wait a year or two, and somebody will give him a call. And this is just speculation. The more point of this is you've seen Michigan after Harbaugh won the championship with them. He left. They get hit with all these different fines, lost scholarships because of the whole situation with stealing signs and whatnot. And they've kind of been, I don't want to say they're losing their footing, but they've been sliding down the hill just a little bit. Where it's at this point, Michigan's they have the sensation of we're starting to slip back down again. It's Ohio State definitely. We're seeing Oregon just walked into the conference a handful of years ago, and they look like they're going to be established as the number 2 in this conference, fighting for that number 1, and we're starting to lose that footing. And I got a feeling that maybe Michigan doesn't make any move this week or next week, but they're going to wait until this playoff, and they're going to pluck one of these coaches from this playoff tree here. I don't know who it's going to be. And I know a lot of coaches have already said, I'm going to stay at Oregon. I'm going to stay at this. They say that. But when you get that Brinks truck backed up, which I know Michigan will do, It's going to be very interesting because Michigan absolutely does need to find somebody to stabilize. This is not somebody that's trying to rebuild a program. This is somebody that's trying to hold the pieces together.
I'm totally with you on Michigan losing its footing a little bit because with the ascendancy of Indiana football, you now have at the moment three teams who are solidly ahead of Michigan football within the Big Ten. And you also have rivals like Michigan State making some moves with the hiring of their new coach. So this could slide quickly. Now, what you will say about Michigan is they were 9-3 this year, but they felt like the most irrelevant 9-3 team of all time. Last year, I believe they had 7 or 8 wins. So they've been all right, but never not like good like they were in 2023. It's hard to win. Michigan is kind of like public Notre Dame. It can be a little hard to win there. Things kind of have to coalesce correctly in order for them to be really, really, really good. They've had that one great season, but you saw in the past when even when Harbaugh was there, who is as good of a college coach as they come. They lost to TCU in the playoff one year. So there is some room there for Michigan to not be as good. But when you mentioned like the amount of money that Michigan's able to pay, I'm just saying like I know there's a lot of Alabama fans out there, and I know they don't really like Kalen DeBoer, so this could be a mutually beneficial thing for Alabama. I think Michigan should absolutely go for Kalen DeBoer. I would pay him. I would say take these Alabama seasons with a grain of salt. Honestly, Kalen DeBoer got offered the Alabama job after coming runner-up to Michigan at Washington. He is a historically great coach. Historically great coach. He is more of a Big Ten, like West Coast kind of guy. Fits the Michigan temperament way, 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 way more than the psychopaths. No offense, guys, down in Alabama fan base. Like, and I'm again not hating. I'm just saying it's like Kentucky basketball. You guys, hey, I think that DeBoer would be a really, really, really good coach. He's going to be able to recruit. He's going to be able to find quarterbacks. And the pressure, although it's very, very high at Michigan, the pressure for them is like be pretty good and beat Ohio State and then be in the mix. Alabama, it's win the national championship every single year. Like literally that's what it is. And if you say it's not, that you're incorrect. You're just factually incorrect. Same thing at Ohio State. Ohio State's is, be pretty good, beat Michigan, be in contention for the national championship. I don't think Michigan fans are under any illusion that they're going to win the national championship every single year because they've won 2 in the past 40 years. So there's less expectation for that to happen. In terms of the monetary commitment, again, I'm not throwing Alabama under the bus at all. Like Alabama is one of the premier college football programs, premier. However, I've been on Alabama's campus about 10 years ago, and I'm sure it's gotten a lot better, and they're doing a lot. Dude, Michigan, it's a whole nother world, man. Actually, they are freaking loaded up there. Just multiple billionaires, multiple people like high Silicon Valley or Wall Street. They're connected all throughout the country. I mean, they have Larry Ellison's money, the Oracle founder. He just bought CBS, Paramount. They have so much money. Like, I'm sorry, like Alabama's got money. Like, no, guys. Michigan has money. They just paid their quarterback. Dave Portnoy, for the love of God, paid their quarterback, that Bryce Underwood, this offseason. I think they have the financial capacity to buy any coach in the country. Now, will they? No, because situations are all different. But I think Kalen DeBoer would be the best coach to be hired by the University of Michigan because of temperament, expectations. They would let him build a little bit. And to bring it back to Sharon Moore, to not make this all about like a coaching conversation or like future coach conversation, is that Michigan I always felt it was a little strange they hired him. I know he had some probably pull in the locker room, and he was all right as a head coach, but it was always strange to me that coming off Harbaugh, that's the guy you get. It felt a little bit like when Villanova's Jay Wright retired, and then Villanova basketball hires Kyle Neptune. It's like, why? Like, oh, he likes the program, and guys respect. Hey, guys, no, you're Villanova basketball. Go hire somebody. Like, let's be a competent athletic department. Sometimes internal hires don't work out that well. Michigan needs to be good for college football, but I think it would be a disappointment if they didn't get somebody like Kalen DeBoer, who I think would fit the personality so much more at Michigan. It would help Alabama fans go out and like move on. Like I know some of them want to, even though they're pretty good, they're not up to the standard that they want at Alabama. And I think culturally it's a weird fit. I think Alabama could go find somebody else that would be best for them. And same for Michigan. My girlfriend went to Michigan. She's a Michigan football fan. I went and watched a game at the Big House in 2023. They actually beat Indiana before Curt Cignetti was there. So interestingly enough, they destroyed them. But it's a program with a lot of great fans and a lot of fans who really are invested in it. But I think they aren't so delusional to think they're going to win every year. And the last note here is you brought up Matt Patricia coaching the Wolverines. I could tell you they would riot. They hate that guy. They hate him, like viscerally hate him because of his Lions tenure. So I doubt that would happen, but wouldn't that be something, man?
That'd be hilarious. I would love it. The state of Michigan would burn. Oh, and then just to jump off of Michigan there, we got to talk about something I have never seen before. I don't think anybody's ever seen where, yeah, maybe a player comes back from retirement, but not the length of Phillip Rivers, who I believe last played in 2020 and is suiting up for the Colts today. It was a head scratcher for me when I heard the announcement. It made sense in terms of like, oh, he probably knows the system, he knows the organization. I get that, but I'm like, this man hasn't played football in 4 to 5 years. I'm like, I don't know how many times he's even thrown a football in the past 2 years. I know he's coaching, he's with his family, but I pulled up the list of like available free agents, and I was like, don't be wrong, it's not impressive, but I'm like, this is the number one option. Like I didn't hear about any other reports on. We're talking to Taylor Heineke. We're talking to, and I get it. The list is not pretty. It's like, but I'm like, that it's like, oh, call up Phil. That's the number one go to. I'm like, what? So I hope, it sounds like I don't want him to do good. I want him to do awesome. I want him to throw for 500 yards today. That would be an awesome story. But it just blows my mind, like, going up to your owner, like, yeah, we got our replacement core. Who is it? Phillip Rivers. And you're like, Phillip Rivers? Like, he still wants to play? It's like, yeah, he looks great. I'm like, first off, I can't imagine, like, let's just say if he's playing the Browns and Myles Garrett gets around the tackle and just lights him up. What's going to happen with Phil? Is he going to turn to dust at that point? I'm joking, but I don't even, man, there's out of shape for football, and then there's like, I haven't played in 4 to 5 years. I'm like, are you going to regret this, man? And that's the other thing. I'm kind of curious. I wonder if he's just like, oh, I'm missing the game. It's only for 4 more weeks, 3 more weeks. Maybe we'll make a little push in the playoff. But he was up for basically Hall of Fame voting this year. And because he's participating, he has delayed that another 5 years, which I thought was probably the most interesting part of this. And I'm like, do you think maybe he's thinking, like, do I have enough on the table here to make it into the Hall of Fame? Because that's been a whole argument. Is it me and Eli? Are we getting in? And I think he's like, why not one more time? And I get it. It's like, if you could put on the pads one more time. I'm like, yeah, I'd probably die if I went out there and played again at even, 28, but be like, I don't blame him if that's the thought process. Now, he's not my quarterback. He's your quarterback. So what's your thought process on this?
I am, excuse me, I am stoked. And I understand the entire narrative around his age and his playing weight and his conditioning. I understand why they did it. It seems like the best quarterbacks available were guys like Taylor Heineke. So Phillip Rivers did know the playbook. He has some familiarity with other players on the team. He has familiarity with Chris Ballard. So to me, it makes sense from that aspect. Now, what's Phil been doing in the offseason? What's he been up to conditioning wise and training wise? Who knows? I think he's been coaching high school football, but NFL level conditioning and training, I don't really know. Now, I do know that Phillip Rivers is one of the smartest quarterbacks of all time. He is a fringe Hall of Famer. We discussed on this podcast a couple of weeks ago that I think he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. I think they're going to give him the nod, and I would like to see him there. Maybe he does think, maybe I got to do a little bit more. But honestly, it seems like he just loves the game and wants to play. And I understand what Nick Wright and Ryan Clark are saying about this being like borderline irresponsible. It just sounds so insane. He hasn't played in 5 years. Like literally, this is I've never understood. I've never seen anything like this. Now, I don't think he's the first guy to have quite a few years of a break before coming back and playing. I think there was another quarterback in the 90s who played for the Falcons. Maybe it was Steve DeBerg. Let me look it up really quick. Steve DeBerg. Yes, that's right. Steve DeBerg, there is precedent for this. He last played in the NFL in 1993, then came back and played for the Atlanta Falcons in 1998. And
how old was he?
He was old. I can't find it exactly, but he played in 8 games. He started 1, and he threw for 369 yards. So he was effectively a backup. Now, I don't know if they threw him right into the fire like they're going to with Phillip Rivers, but Phillip Rivers is better than Steve DeBerg all time. So we will see. He's a better quarterback. I am like actually, I know I'm gonna remove myself being a Colts fan. Like this is a Kenton football take, not a Kenton. This has anything to do with the Colts take. Is I actually think he could do all right. Like I think we could come away from today and he has like 2 touchdowns and maybe like 200 yards or something, maybe a pick, win or lose, I don't know. But I think there is capacity for him to do okay and surprise some people. I understand the rationale behind it. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I do think, he could evaporate into thin air if he gets hit right. Tom Brady the other day said, he thinks he could still play. I totally believe him. I think Tom Brady still could play. It's how many times are these guys going to get hit? That's really the worry, because I don't have any worries about Phillip Rivers going out there and throwing the ball. Like genuinely, I think he could still make most of the throws. I think Steichen's a great offensive coordinator, and even though he's a head coach, I think he could call some stuff up for Phil to be successful.
I mean, I think you put him in this situation. I agree. I don't think he's just, he forgot how to throw. He can only throw it 15 yards. Now, I'm not saying that. And I do think they'll have the right offensive set for him to give him the most protection he can. And, it's the matchup against Seattle is one of the worst matchups you could possibly cook up this season. I'd maybe feel more confident. It's like, he's facing the Washington Commanders. I'd be like, okay, yeah, let's see what he's got. And then I'm sitting here, I'm like, this is a team, especially their pass defense, that have just buried other teams. This is a defense that has slowly been cooked in the past 2 to 3 years, just slowly adding talent and depth. And all of a sudden, it's like, man, it's all come to culmination. It looks like, if you had the talent of the 49ers 2 years ago and you swapped it now at the Seahawks, I'm like, dude, they're the defensive terror in the NFC, to be honest, in my opinion. Them It, that's maybe me making a leap right there. But if I'm being honest, I think, in my opinion, the best two or the better two defenses in the league are Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks, in my opinion. It's the Seahawks. This, if you haven't watched a game, because I know they're on West Coast, they they are scary. Their defense has been just this talent that they've been hoarding the past few years with the drafts and adding pieces in through free agency. It's I wish the best for Phillip Rivers. I would be shocked if, personally, if you want to sit here and say the over under for me, if I was going to set it, be like, I don't know if he gets over 200 yards today. We'll see. I think that's fair for a guy that hasn't played a game in 4 or 5 years, but it's. I wish nothing but the best for Phil, but this is one of the worst matchups he could have pulled for the entire season.
Doesn't this feel kind of like a little like football magic-y though? Like you said you're a glass half empty guy. I'm more of a glass half full, but I will say like this to me feels like a 30 for 30. Like I mean, it could be very reasonable that he goes out there and the Colts lose and he looks like, a scarecrow and it's just bad. But man, like I don't know. Again, this is me being like not a Colts fan. Like, but I understand the roster construction. To me, like if there was a situation for this to like happen positively, it's this situation right here. The Colts have a pretty good line. They have a pretty good coach. They're competitive in the playoff type team, and they have one of the best running backs in the league to take the pressure off him. He also has some dump off weapons he could use. Good receivers. Like the offense is built for, hey, maybe this could happen. Now I do concede that Seattle is an incredible defense, and that they could get after him, certainly, and he could take some hits. But it's just like the Daniel Jones thing for Steichen to me. It's like them being like, I know they didn't have a lot of options, but going to Phillip Rivers, it just feels like there's something a little bit there. And it's a not a great chance, but there is definitely a chance that we tomorrow are like having a conversation in the media or whatever, like, man, like Philip, like what was that? Like this is a documentary type thing. This is what's so great about sports is like, and this is so scary and anxiety inducing. This old man's coming back, but he's Philip Rivers. And he's sitting there and he's going to be like dadgummit on the sideline. We were literally foreshadowing this. We were talking about, could he be in the Hall of Fame 2 weeks ago? And now here he is. He's fucking playing. It's 2025, and he's playing for my team, who he's had experience playing for. I'm going to be locked in to this game.
So I just hope that we have not had this false hope just because we saw Joe Flacco kind of pull some magic out of the hat the past 2 years. We'll see. I hope he does. I really do.
Just 1 week.
Just because he's one of those childhood, like, it's like I watched him growing up for so many years. Man, it's how I don't even want to put this in the atmosphere. But what happens if he were to go down? What do the Colts do at this point? They're like, all right, I guess we're giving another call to somebody, or it's like we're just screwed, guys. Just the season is officially done. We're not allowed to win because I don't think I got to ask you this, but Daniel Jones gets hurt. You trade next year's first round draft pick to get Sauce Gardner. You don't have a quarterback of the future as of right now because Daniel Jones is a 1-year contract. You don't have a first round pick. All of a sudden, it's a tale of two halves for this first season. You're like, wow, we're going to be back on top. We got the division. It looks like all the pieces are finally in place. And flip the script, heart shattered. This team looks like it's back to like step 3 in the 5-step plan. And I don't know what they're going to do. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I hate to say this, but luckily they do still have Anthony Richardson, who hopefully maybe Daniel Jones is still recovering, but there's that option. I do think they're going to re-sign Daniel Jones, although there's going to be some debate about that now, and it will be like another 1-year deal. So we'll see. I also think they probably sign a veteran of some sort to kind of bolster the quarterback room. Like Phillip Rivers, this is just going to be like a this year kind of thing. Like he's not going to be the quarterback next year. So they don't have a lot of great options, but that's the most likely thing for them is to probably roll with Anthony Richardson and sign a veteran quarterback in the offseason and keep Daniel Jones kind of in the fold.
Would you trade a third rounder for Kyler Murray?
Oh, whoo. That's all he's worth? Third rounder? Yeah, dude.
I don't think he's worth a first. You could probably negotiate. I think a second is more realistic. That's just a number I threw out. But you've also got his contract. It's not like, oh, he's only got 1 year left. I'm like, no, he's locked in. So if you were to give him a third, you'd probably be like, hey, we're just going to eat his money. You don't have to pay for it. We'll give you cash on top of it. So I could see that if you just like, hey, Cardinals contract, you don't have to pay the penalty for it. So I could see a third for that. Plus, I just think they want him out of there at this point.
Yeah,
You know,
I
something's
could see
better
that.
than
I didn't
nothing.
really even consider it, but they're in win now mode. The Colts are in win now mode. That's why you make the Sauce Gardner trade. It was fun when that happened. I liked it, but like the two first round picks for Sauce Gardner, I think he's a little bit overrated as a player. That's just me. So giving up that kind of draft capital for Sauce Gardner was a little bit of a head scratcher, especially in the midseason, you know, kind of throes of everything. I would give up a third round pick for Kyler Murray. I mean, I got to look up like what our draft is like looking like, our draftability going forward, but there's not a lot of great quarterbacks, and I think this is a weak quarterback draft this year. I know, shout out to Mendoza for winning the Heisman, and I know that Dante Moore from Oregon is also pretty good. Those are the two guys. There's also that Ty Simpson who's been floated around from Alabama. He didn't look very good against Georgia, but I don't really. I'm not really like. I mean, even Mendoza. Like, I would stay away from a quarterback this year personally, but not
I mean,
not being the Colts, just in any team really. But
yeah, the draft selections, and this happens to a degree every year, but this is truly how do the playoffs shake out with individual performances of some of these quarterbacks? That's going to be what determines who's going to go at the top of the class. And what I mean by that is if Mendoza separates himself, whoever's at one, let's just say, let's for me, let's just hope the Titans have the number one pick again, and Mendoza separates himself. Does the team come up and be like, hey, this is our guy? We're going to give you all of these different puzzle pieces here so we can get this guy. If not, is this going to be one of those quarterback classes where we're kind of waiting and waiting, and it's like, oh, first quarterback was taken fifth overall, or let's say, I don't think this is going to happen because it doesn't happen in the NFL anymore, but it's like the EJ Manuel draft class where it's like him and that's it, and like, then you'll see second and third round. We'll see. I think we're at the point where teams are desperate enough to just keep taking swings at quarterbacks that we're always going to see multiple first round quarterbacks. But I've seen worse quarterback classes, that's for sure. We'll see. We really will. I think this will be seems like a good tackle class from what they keep saying, which has not come around in a while. And we'll have to see the race for the tank. Who's going to be the first overall pick in the NFL? Because the Titans had it for the longest time, and they decided to win a game, which conflicts my heart because I want them to win, but I also see them. It's like, oh, we went from first to fourth or third now, and I'm like, guys, please do something right for once. If you're gonna suck, be the worst.
I think Tennessee, might as well, like whether you get the first, second, or third pick, like the first guys, it seems like are going to go toward quarterbacks anyway, so it's kind of a wash. I mean, they could always trade down, but I don't know what kind of guys they really are looking at.
Well, I just want them to have the one pick to have a team desperate enough to be like, we're going to give you the haul Because if we're
Hmm.
sitting, let's just say at 4, I'm like, yeah, we're still going to get a guy that we like, that I think I would like, and that would help the team out. But you're not going to get all that capital because this is not a team that we're a couple pieces away. This is bad, 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 bad roster. We have 2 players on the entire team where I'm genuinely like, this is an exciting and good player, or I have hope for this player. Everybody else, we could toss and I wouldn't be upset. Um, is there I think we hit a lot of the main topics. Is there any one that you wanted to throw out there last minute, or do you feel like we got our conversation into?
So the real last thing I'll say is obviously I am out of our fantasy league contention. My other league, I am in it. I finished 8-6, and it's a money league too, 12 teams, PPR, and I'm up 54-14. I started Travis, Etienne, Trevor Lawrence, Tyron Tracy. Those guys are playing right now. Trevor Lawrence has 4 touchdowns, and Tyron Tracy has 2. So I'm like, next week is, if I win this week, next week is like make my money back or whatever. But $900 is the pot in this league, and I would freaking love to be able to do that. However, this team has flaws. I'm just going to read it off very quickly. Trevor Lawrence, ETN, Tyrone Tracy. I have Amon-Ra, Devontae, Tyler Warren, Aaron Jones, just picked up the Panthers D, McPherson, David Montgomery, Olave, Blake Corum, Rams D, Cooper Kupp, Isaiah Likely, and then I picked up Shador Sanders. He's probably going to get dropped for Tyler Shuck, I would say. And then Jaden Daniels is out, and he is on my IR spot. So not a great team, but I may be chugging along to the semis. We shall see. I've won 5 straight.
Yeah, Tracy, I started him in another league I'm in. I'm in way too many leagues. I'm in 6 this year. I hate it. Tracy, I put him over Kenneth Walker. I was like, you know
But
what,
yeah,
man, I'm not supposed to win this week. Let's try it out. I like the matchup, and he's balling. In terms of our league, I don't know if you've gotten to look at any of the scores right now.
not yet.
So Jacob is beating Austin 59-26, and he's projected to win. I'm happy with this. I'm terrified of Austin's team. Um, Grant is currently beating Tanner 47-27. He's projected to win, but that looks like it's going to be a lower scoring game. And then Hunter is currently beating LJ 65-49, but LJ is projected to win 145 to like 135. So it's close. Nothing's obviously decided. It's 3 o'clock right now. We still got the 1 o'clock games going on. During this last segment, I've had like the ESPN scores pulled up just to see what's going on in the league right now. And when I first hopped on, the Patriots were winning. I believe it was 21-7. I was like, oh, but now it's 24-21. So I am. Once we get this wrapped up, I'm very excited to catch the second half of these 1 o'clock games, and the 4 o'clock games. Of course, we have Lions and Rams. That's going to be fireworks. Packers and Broncos. That's going to be an interesting game. Those are some playoff powers right there. We got Panthers and Saints. Who knows what Panthers are going to show up today? And the Titans and the 49ers, where the Titans will be sacrificed once again. And then, of course, Phillip Rivers against the Seahawks. So we have a really good slate today. Yeah, a lot of these 1 o'clock games, Chargers Chiefs competitive, Bills Patriots competitive, Commanders Giants competitive. Everything else is a little one sided. Bengals are down 17-0.
But with that, y'all, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Get to watching some football. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the pod on our YouTube channel. Logan, anything else?
No, I want to appreciate everybody for listening. I will say we've been coming up with these topics, but feel free if there's a certain topic you want to hear and you want to put it in the comments, by all means. We're open to really anything. We've been talking sports lately, but if you're like, hey, you guys need to watch this show and or do this or talk more about this sport, whatever it might be, we want to hear it because we want to make this entertaining for everybody. But thanks for tuning in. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Sunday and a good week, and we'll be on next week.
See y'all later.